The white coat hit the floor with a wet slap, blood still fresh on the sleeve. Security guards shoved Nurse Emma Cross onto her knees in the center of the emergency room, ripping her hospital badge from her scrubs while doctors and patients watched in stunned silence. Dr. Marcus Donovan stood over her, pointing an accusing finger, his voice echoing through the chaos. "You killed him with your negligence." Emma didn't beg, didn't cry. She just stared up at him with eyes that had seen things no civilian doctor could imagine. "You have no idea what you just did," she said quietly. Then the windows rattled. Military helicopters descended on Mercy Ridge Hospital in Phoenix like wolves circling prey, and armed soldiers burst through the doors demanding answers. Before we dive into this story, I want to ask you something. Stick with me until the very end, and then drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see just how far these stories can travel. Hit that like button, and let's get started. The fluorescent lights of Mercy Ridge Hospital buzzed overhead like dying insects, casting everything in that sickly institutional glow that made healthy people look half dead. Emma Cross moved through the emergency department with practiced efficiency, her sneakers squeaking softly against linoleum that had been mopped so many times the pattern had faded to ghost marks. Third shift. Graveyard hours. The kind of work that aged you in dog years. She'd been at Mercy Ridge for 6 months now, keeping her head down, doing her job, staying invisible. That was the whole point. Blend in, be forgettable, let the past stay buried where it belonged. "Emma!" A resident stumbled past her carrying 3 charts and a coffee that was mostly spilling. "Trauma 2 needs vitals, and the guy in 7 keeps trying to leave AMA." "On it," Emma said, already moving. The ER was controlled chaos tonight, nothing unusual. A construction worker with a nail gun injury, a college kid who'd mixed the wrong pills at a party, an elderly woman with chest pain whose daughter kept demanding to speak to a real doctor every time a nurse approached. Standard Friday night in a city hospital. Emma had just finished starting an IV on the construction worker when she heard the commotion near the ambulance bay. "Clear the hallway, VIP coming through." She glanced up to see Dr. Marcus Donovan striding through the automatic doors like he owned the building, which, in a way, he did. Chief of Emergency Medicine, golden boy of the hospital board, and the son of real estate developers so wealthy they had a wing named after them. Everything about Donovan screamed money and power. The designer watch, the perfect teeth, the way he expected everyone to move when he walked. Behind him, paramedics wheeled in a stretcher carrying a young man in expensive clothes. Early 20s, pale, sweating, barely conscious. "This is Tyler Brennan," Donovan announced to the room, his voice sharp with authority. "Son of hospital board director James Brennan. Possible overdose. I want our best people on this." Emma watched from Trauma 2 as they rushed the young man into the main treatment area. She recognized the name Brennan. Everyone did. The family practically owned half the hospital's funding. This wasn't just another patient. This was politics with a pulse. She turned back to her own patient, finishing the IV placement and updating his chart. Not her circus, not her monkeys. "Nurse Cross!" Emma's head snapped up. Dr. Donovan was standing in the doorway of the trauma bay, his face flushed with anger. "I need you in here, now!" She exchanged a glance with the resident, then headed toward the trauma bay. The moment she stepped inside, something felt wrong. The atmosphere was too tense, too focused. Tyler Brennan lay on the gurney, an IV already running, oxygen mask fogged with shallow breaths. But it was the way everyone was looking at her that made Emma's instincts prickle. "Mr. Brennan was admitted to our recovery wing 3 days ago," Donovan said, his voice tight. "Detox treatment. You were assigned to his floor during your last rotation. According to the records, you administered his medications." Emma kept her face neutral. "I administered what was ordered, same as every other patient." "Really?" Donovan moved closer, his expensive cologne cutting through the antiseptic smell. "Because his tox screen shows enough fentanyl in his system to kill a horse. And guess whose signature is on the medication logs?" The room went very quiet. Emma looked at the chart he shoved toward her, her handwriting, her employee ID number. Documentation that appeared to show she'd given Tyler Brennan nearly triple his prescribed dose over the past 72 hours. "That's not possible," she said calmly. "I followed the orders exactly." "Did you?" Donovan's voice was rising now, playing to the audience of nurses and residents watching from the hallway. Or did you make a mistake and you're trying to cover it up? Emma felt the familiar cold settling into her chest, the same cold that used to come right before incoming fire. I don't make mistakes with medications. Every dose was witnessed and documented according to protocol. Your protocol just nearly killed a patient. Donovan grabbed the chart from her hands. Security! Get her out of here, now! 2 security guards appeared at the door like they'd been waiting for their cue. Emma didn't resist as they took her arms. She knew how this worked. Wealthy family, influential doctor, expendable nurse. The math was simple and brutal. Dr. Donovan, she said quietly as they started to pull her away, you should double-check those logs, because someone altered them. His face went hard. Are you seriously trying to blame someone else right now? I'm telling you to verify the records before you make this worse. The only thing that's worse is that we trusted you with patient care. Donovan turned to the security guards. Take her to administration. I want her badge, her access, everything. She's done at this hospital. They dragged her through the emergency department like a perp walk. Nurses she'd worked beside for months suddenly found reasons to look away. The resident who'd asked for her help earlier pretended to be absorbed in a chart. Emma kept her expression blank, even as they forced her to her knees in the middle of the main floor. Badge, one of the security guards demanded. Guards. She unclipped it herself, handed it over. The plastic felt light in her palm. Just an ID card. Just a job. Not worth fighting over. Except something about this whole situation stank. Tyler Brennan wasn't just any overdose patient. He was the hospital director's son, supposedly in a secured recovery ward, and somehow he'd gotten his hands on enough fentanyl to stop his heart. That didn't happen by accident in a place like Mercy Ridge. Too many cameras, too many protocols, too many people watching. Someone had arranged this. Someone had altered those medication logs. And they'd chosen Emma as the scapegoat. The question was why? You're suspended pending investigation, the guard said, his voice not unkind. You need to leave the premises immediately. Emma stood up slowly. Blood from the construction worker's IV still streaked across her scrub sleeve. She looked past the security guards to where Dr. Donovan stood in the trauma bay, arms crossed, watching her removal with cold satisfaction. Dr. Donovan, she called across the emergency department. He looked up, irritated at being addressed. You just made the worst mistake of your career. His expression flickered with something, confusion, maybe, or anger. But before he could respond, Emma heard it. That distinctive sound. Deep, rhythmic, unmistakable. Helicopter rotors. Not the light medical choppers they used for air ambulance. These were heavy birds. Military transport. And they were coming in low and fast. The windows began to rattle. Patients looked up nervously. A doctor moved to the glass and froze. What the hell? Someone whispered. Emma felt something shift in her chest. A door she'd kept locked for 6 years was starting to crack open. The helicopters thundered over the hospital roof, so close the building seemed to shake. Car alarms erupted across the parking lot. Then came the sound of tires screaming on pavement, engines roaring, doors slamming. The security guard holding Emma's arm loosened his grip. What's going on? She didn't answer. She was watching the ambulance bay entrance. The automatic doors burst open and soldiers poured through. Not hospital security, not police, but actual military personnel in full tactical gear. They moved with the kind of precision that came from combat training, weapons ready, scanning the room with hard professional eyes. Behind them walked a man in a dress uniform decorated with enough medals and ribbons to tell a story of decades in service. A colonel. Maybe higher. Emma couldn't see the insignia clearly from this distance, but she recognized authority when she saw it. The emergency department went silent. Dr. Donovan stepped forward, his confident posture faltering slightly. What is the meaning of this? This is a civilian hospital. You can't just... Where's Lieutenant Emma Cross? The officer's voice cut through the room like a blade. Emma felt every eye in the department turned toward her. She was still on her knees, badge gone, suspension official, surrounded by security guards who suddenly looked very uncertain about what they should be doing. Donovan's face went pale. Lieutenant? The officer spotted Emma and moved toward her with purpose. The soldiers followed, forming a perimeter that made the security guards back away instinctively. Ma'am, the officer said, and his tone held nothing but respect. We need you. Emma stayed kneeling, her mind racing through possibilities. She hadn't been Lieutenant Cross in 6 years. She'd left that life behind after the last deployment, after everything that happened in Kandahar, after watching too many people die on operating tables in tents that smelled like blood and dust. "I'm retired, Colonel," she said quietly. "I know, ma'am, but we have a situation that requires your specific expertise." He extended his hand to help her up. Senator Patricia Vance was injured in an explosion downtown 20 minutes ago. She's being transported here now. Her injuries are consistent with exposure to a military-grade neurotoxin. Emma's blood went cold. "Which toxin?" "VX derivative, modified formula we've never seen before." She was on her feet before she made a conscious decision to move. "How long since exposure?" 43 minutes. "Not enough time. Never enough time with VX. I need hazmat protocols in place, atropine ready, intubation kit standing by, and everyone in this department who isn't essential cleared out immediately," Emma said, her voice shifting into a command tone she hadn't used in years. "We're going to need—" "She's suspended!" Dr. Donovan pushed forward, his face red with anger and confusion. "She doesn't work here anymore. You can't just walk into my emergency department and—" The colonel turned to look at Donovan, and something in his expression made the doctor's words die in his throat. "Lieutenant Cross," the colonel said, still looking at Donovan, "was the lead combat medic for the 75th Ranger Regiment's Special Operations Task Force. She has more field experience with chemical weapons and battlefield toxicology than every doctor in this hospital combined. If you want Senator Vance to survive the next hour, you'll get out of her way." The automatic doors burst open again. Paramedics rushed in, pushing a gurney carrying a middle-aged woman in a business suit. Emma could see the symptoms from across the room: excessive sweating, pinpoint pupils, the slight tremor in her hands that meant the neurotoxin was attacking her nervous system. 45 minutes since exposure," one of the paramedics shouted. "She started seizing in the ambulance. We've got her on oxygen, but her saties are dropping." Emma was already moving. Training kicked in like muscle memory. Years of war medicine overriding everything else. She grabbed gloves from a nearby station and snapped them on as she reached the gurney. "Get her into Trauma 1. I need 4 lines running. Someone start pushing atropine. 2 milligrams IV push, repeat every 5 minutes until we see improvement. Set up for immediate intubation because her respiratory system is going to shut down in the next 10 minutes. The trauma team hesitated, looking between Emma and Dr. Donovan. "Do it," the colonel barked. They moved. Emma leaned over the senator, checking her pupils, her breathing, the muscle fasciculations that were spreading across her face and neck. VX derivative. Modified formula, which meant the standard treatment protocols might not be enough. "Someone talk to me about what happened," Emma said, her hands already working to establish a second IV line. "What kind of explosion? Where was she when it happened?" A man in a suit, Secret Service, Emma guessed from the earpiece and the way he moved, stepped forward. "Federal courthouse, package bomb." She was opening her mail when it detonated. Small explosion, but it released a gas. 3 other people were exposed, but she got the worst of it. "Package bomb with a chemical payload," Emma muttered, her mind racing through the implications. "That's sophisticated. Military-level sophisticated." The senator's breathing was getting worse. Emma could hear the rattle in her lungs, see the way her chest struggled for each breath. "Atropine's in," a nurse called out. "Push another dose, and get me pralidoxim, 600 milligrams IM, both thighs." Emma turned to the colonel. "You said modified formula. Modified how?" "We don't know. That's why we need you." CIA intercepted chatter about a new neurotoxin being developed, but we couldn't get details. When Senator Vance was hit, your name came up as the only person in the region with field experience identifying unknown chemical agents. Emma's hands never stopped moving, checking vitals, adjusting oxygen flow, watching for any sign of improvement or deterioration. But her mind was somewhere else now, pulling up memories she'd tried to bury. Kandahar. 3 years ago. An attack on a coalition base that used a nerve agent no one recognized. Emma had been the one to figure out it was a hybrid formula, part VX and part something else, something engineered specifically to defeat standard countermeasures. She'd saved 14 soldiers that day by improvising a treatment protocol in the field. She'd also watched 6 others die because she figured it out too late. Her pupils are responding, the nurse said, a note of hope in her voice. Emma checked. Slight improvement. The atropine was working, but not fast enough. We need to push more aggressive treatment, Emma said. This isn't standard VX. Someone engineered it to be resistant to atropine. We need to flood her system with countermeasures and hope we can outpace the toxin's effects. Dr. Donovan had been standing at the edge of the trauma bay, watching with an expression that cycled between anger and disbelief. Now he stepped forward. You can't just improvise treatment on a United States senator, he said. This needs to be by the book. We need to consult with toxicology, get proper protocols in place. She'll be dead in 12 minutes if we do that. Emma cut him off, not looking away from her patient. I've seen this before. Standard protocols won't work. You're basing that on what? Field medicine in some war zone? This is a civilian hospital with civilian standards of care. I'm the chief of this department, and I'm telling you to slow down and follow proper procedure. Emma's jaw tightened. She could feel the familiar rage building, the same rage she'd learned to control during deployments when officers who'd never seen combat tried to second-guess her medical decisions. The senator's breathing was getting worse. Another minute of arguing, and they'd lose her. Colonel, Emma said quietly, her eyes still on her patient, I need you to remove Dr. Donovan from this trauma bay. Now. You can't, Donovan started. Two soldiers stepped forward, their hands moving to Donovan's arms. This is my hospital. Donovan's voice cracked with fury. You have no authority here. Actually, the colonel said, his voice calm and absolutely certain, under emergency federal response protocol, in cases involving attacks on federal officials, military command has full authority over medical treatment. Lieutenant Cross is now in command of this trauma bay. If you interfere with her treatment of Senator Vance, you will be removed from this building in restraints. Your choice, Doctor. Donovan's face went through several colors. Then he turned and stormed out of the trauma bay, his expensive shoes clicking angrily against the floor. Emma didn't watch him go. She was too focused on the senator's declining vitals. Pralidoximi's in, a nurse reported. Good. Now we wait and see if it's enough. Emma checked the monitors. Heart rate still elevated but starting to stabilize, oxygen saturation climbing slowly. Come on, she whispered. Fight it. The senator's eyes fluttered. Her breathing, while still labored, was becoming less desperate. The muscle tremors were beginning to ease. I think it's working, the nurse said, cautious hope in her voice. Emma allowed herself a small breath of relief. Keep pushing fluids. Monitor her vitals every 2 minutes. If her breathing deteriorates again, we intubate immediately. But I think we're past the crisis point. The tension in the trauma bay eased slightly. The medical staff exchanged glances of relief and exhausted triumph. Emma stepped back from the gurney, peeling off her gloves. Her hands were steady, they always were during emergencies, but she could feel the adrenaline starting to drain away, leaving that familiar hollow feeling behind. The colonel approached her, his expression grave. Well done, Lieutenant. I'm not a lieutenant anymore, Emma said tiredly. I'm just a nurse, or I was until about 20 minutes ago. About that. The colonel's voice dropped lower. We need to talk, privately. Emma glanced at him sharply. Something in his tone set off warning bells. Before she could respond, Senator Vance's eyes opened fully. She was weak, disoriented, but conscious. Her gaze found Emma and focused with surprising intensity for someone who'd just been dying. You, the senator whispered, her voice raspy. You saved me. Just doing my job, ma'am. The senator's hand shot out with surprising strength, grabbing Emma's wrist. Her eyes were wild with fear and something else, something that looked like urgency. The attack, she gasped. It wasn't random. Someone knew I'd be in that office. Someone knew I'd open that specific package. Emma felt ice in her veins. Senator, you need to rest. No. The senator's grip tightened. You don't understand. I was investigating something big, and now someone tried to kill me. Her voice dropped to a desperate whisper. The attack came from inside the courthouse, maybe inside my own office. The colonel stepped forward. Senator Vance, please. But the senator was still staring at Emma, her eyes boring into her with frantic intensity. You need to know something. The neurotoxin, it's not foreign, it's domestic. Someone in our own military developed it, and I think they tested it on someone before me. Emma's blood went cold. What do you mean, tested it? 3 weeks ago, the senator whispered, her strength fading fast. A soldier died at Walter Reed. They said it was a training accident. But I saw the medical reports. The symptoms were identical to what just happened to me. Someone in our own government is making chemical weapons, and they're willing to kill anyone who finds out. The words hung in the air like poison themselves. The senator's eyes rolled back and her hand went limp. Emma immediately checked her vitals, still stable, just exhausted from the toxin and the trauma. She was going to survive. But her words were going to haunt this room for a long time. The colonel's face had gone hard. Clear the room. Everyone who's not essential medical staff, out. Now. The trauma bay emptied quickly, leaving only Emma, the colonel, and 2 nurses monitoring the senator's vitals. "Lieutenant Cross," the colonel said, and his voice had taken on a different quality now, harder, colder, with an edge that spoke of classified briefings and need-to-know protocols. "Before you left the service, you were cleared for several operations involving chemical weapons development programs. You have knowledge of certain projects that remain classified." Emma felt her stomach drop. "I signed NDAs. I've never talked about any of that." "I know. But now we have a situation." He moved closer, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Senator Vance chairs the Armed Services Committee. She has oversight authority on black budget programs. If what she's saying is true, if someone inside our own military is developing unauthorized chemical weapons, then we have a problem that goes way beyond one attempted assassination." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you were there, Lieutenant. 3 years ago in Kandahar. That hybrid nerve agent that hit the coalition base. You were the one who identified it as a new formula. You submitted a report classified at the highest levels." Emma's mouth went dry. She remembered that report, remembered the questions that followed, remembered being told to never speak of it again. "What does that have to do with this?" The colonel pulled out a tablet and showed her a chemical formula. Emma recognized it immediately, the same structure she'd identified in Kandahar, but modified, refined, more deadly. "This is what Senator Vance was exposed to today," the colonel said. "It's an evolution of the same compound you encountered overseas, which means whoever developed the original formula is still working on it, still refining it, still testing it." "Testing it on American citizens," Emma said quietly. "Testing it on anyone who gets too close to the truth." A chill ran through Emma's entire body. She looked down at Senator Vance, stable now but still unconscious, and understood that she'd just saved someone that powerful people wanted dead. "Colonel, I'm retired. I left that life behind for a reason. I can't get pulled back into— Oh, you're already pulled in, Lieutenant." His voice was gentle, but absolutely certain. "The moment you walked into that trauma bay and saved the senator's life, you became part of this. And based on what just happened with Dr. Donovan and those falsified medication logs, I'd say you were already a target before we even arrived." Emma's head snapped up. "What?" "Think about it. You show up at this hospital 6 months ago with a background that doesn't quite add up. You keep a low profile, do your job, don't make waves, then suddenly a VIP patient overdoses and you're blamed for it, right before a federal official gets attacked with a chemical weapon you have specific knowledge about. That's not coincidence." The pieces were starting to fall into place, and Emma didn't like the picture they were forming. "Someone knew I was here," she said slowly. "Someone knew about my background and my experience with chemical weapons. They tried to discredit me, get me fired, maybe even arrested, so I wouldn't be available when Senator Vance got hit. That's my assessment." "But how did they know? My service records are classified. My time with special operations is supposed to be buried so deep." "Oh." "Which means whoever's behind this has access to classified military personnel files." The colonel's expression was grim. "This isn't some rogue scientist, Lieutenant. This is someone with serious clearance and serious resources. Someone who can manipulate hospital records, access classified databases, and coordinate complex attacks on federal officials." Emma felt like she was standing on the edge of a cliff. She'd spent 6 years trying to build a normal life, trying to forget the things she'd seen and done, trying to be just a nurse in a civilian hospital. And now that life was crumbling around her. "What do you need from me?" she asked quietly. "Right now? I need you to stay close to Senator Vance. She trusts you, and if someone tried to kill her once, they might try again. I've been suspended. I can't exactly hang around the hospital. Leave that to me. The colonel stepped toward the door, then paused. One more thing, Lieutenant. Be careful who you trust. If someone inside this hospital helped set you up, they're probably still here. And now that you've saved the senator, you've made yourself a very inconvenient loose end. He left, taking his soldiers with him, leaving Emma standing in the trauma bay with an unconscious senator and the growing realization that her carefully constructed normal life had just been blown apart. She looked down at her hands. Steady, capable, hands that had saved lives in war zones and operating rooms across multiple continents. Hands that someone had just tried to destroy with falsified records and manufactured accusations. Emma Cross felt something shift inside her, something cold and focused and very, very dangerous. She'd spent 6 years being invisible, being forgettable, being just another nurse. That was over now. She walked to the trauma bay computer and pulled up Tyler Brennan's medical records, the real ones, not the manipulated versions Dr. Donovan had shown her. It took some careful digging, but Emma had learned a lot about computer systems during her military service. Security wasn't as tight as people thought if you knew where to look. There, the medication logs. Her original documentation, time-stamped and verified. Every dose she'd given was correct, exactly as ordered, but there was another set of entries added later with her employee ID but different timestamps. Someone had accessed her account and created false records showing she'd administered lethal doses. The access codes told the story. The changes had been made from a terminal in the hospital administration wing. 3 days ago, right after Tyler Brennan was admitted. Emma felt her jaw tighten. This was planned, calculated. Someone had set this up days in advance, waiting for the right moment to trigger Emma's removal from the hospital. The question was who? And more importantly, why? She printed the evidence, tucked it into her scrubs, and headed toward the door. But as she reached the hallway, she nearly collided with Dr. Donovan. He was standing just outside the trauma bay, his expression unreadable. For a moment they just stared at each other, the disgraced nurse and the powerful doctor who'd tried to destroy her career. "You knew," Emma said quietly. "You knew I didn't give that kid an overdose, but you accused me anyway." Donovan's face flickered with something that might have been guilt or fear. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do." Emma stepped closer, keeping her voice low. "Someone asked you to get rid of me today, to make sure I wasn't available when Senator Vance came in. You helped them." "You're paranoid," Donovan said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Maybe. Or maybe you just made a deal with people who are willing to kill federal officials to protect their secrets." Emma watched his face carefully. "What did they offer you? Money? Prestige? A position with some pharmaceutical company or defense contractor?" Donovan's expression hardened. "Get out of my hospital. This isn't your hospital anymore, doctor. Not after what just happened. Federal agents are going to be crawling all over this place within the hour. They're going to pull every record, interview every staff member, track every dollar that flows through this building. And eventually they're going to figure out that you helped someone try to kill a sitting senator." His face went pale. "I didn't know." "Didn't know what? That the setup job you ran on me was part of an assassination attempt? Or didn't want to know?" Emma felt a cold satisfaction watching him crumble. "Here's what's going to happen now. You're going to go to the federal agents when they arrive. You're going to tell them everything about who approached you, what they asked you to do, how much they paid you, and you're going to pray that cooperation buys you some leniency." "They'll kill me," Donovan whispered. "Then you'd better hope the federal government can protect you. Because if you don't cooperate, you're going to prison for a very long time, and doctors don't do well in prison." She pushed past him and headed for the exit. But she'd only made it halfway across the emergency department when the building's alarm system started wailing. Red lights flashed. A computerized voice echoed through the hallways. "Lockdown protocol initiated. All personnel remain in current locations. Security breach in progress." Emma froze. Around her, nurses and doctors looked at each other with confusion and growing fear. The automatic doors at the ambulance bay entrance slid open and more soldiers poured in, but these ones weren't with the colonel. These were different, moving faster, more aggressive, and their weapons weren't holstered. "Everyone on the ground!" one of them shouted. "Hands where we can see them!" Emma's combat instinct screamed danger. Something was very wrong. She watched as the soldiers, if that's what they really were, spread through the emergency department with military precision. They weren't here to protect anyone. They were searching for something, or someone. One of them locked eyes with Emma across the room. He reached for his radio, spoke quickly into it, then started moving in her direction. Emma turned and ran. Behind her, she heard shouting, the sound of boots pounding on linoleum. She burst through the door into the stairwell and took the stairs 3 at a time, her mind racing through options. The hospital was in lockdown. The exits would be sealed, but she'd spent months working here. She knew this building better than most. There was a service tunnel in the basement, used for maintenance and supply deliveries. It connected to the parking structure 2 blocks away. If she could reach it. Gunfire erupted behind her. The stairwell wall exploded in a shower of concrete dust inches from her head. They weren't trying to arrest her. They were trying to kill her. Emma threw herself through the 3rd-floor door and sprinted down the hallway. Patients screamed. A nurse dropped a tray of medications. Emma vaulted over a wheelchair and crashed through a door marked "Authorized Personnel Only." The service corridor. Dark, narrow, lined with pipes and electrical conduits. She could hear her pursuers behind her getting closer. She reached another stairwell and plunged downward, her legs burning, her heart hammering. Ground floor, basement level. The air grew cooler and smelled of industrial cleaning chemicals. The service tunnel entrance was ahead, a heavy metal door with a keycard lock. Emma's badge was gone, confiscated by security, but she'd watched the maintenance crew use this door dozens of times. They kept a spare card taped under the nearby fire extinguisher housing. She grabbed it, swiped, prayed. The lock clicked green. Emma threw herself through the door and slammed it behind her just as her pursuers reached the corridor. The tunnel stretched ahead into darkness, lit only by emergency lighting strips. She ran. Behind her, the door exploded open. Flashlight beams cut through the darkness. More gunfire. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space. Emma's lungs burned. Her legs felt like lead. But she kept running because stopping meant dying. The tunnel branched. She went left, then right, trying to lose her pursuers in the maze of underground passages. She could hear them behind her, coordinating over radios, systematic and professional. Whoever they were, they knew what they were doing. She burst out into the parking structure, the night air hitting her like a slap. Cars everywhere, security cameras, people, witnesses. The gunfire stopped. Emma ducked behind a concrete pillar, gasping for breath, trying to think. She'd escaped for now. But she was trapped in a city with no resources, no backup, and people with serious weapons hunting her. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out with shaking hands. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her swipe to accept the call. Lieutenant Cross. The voice was distorted, electronically masked. I'm impressed you made it out of the hospital alive. Most people don't survive their first encounter with those particular soldiers. Who is this? Someone who can help you, or kill you. Your choice depends on what you do in the next 60 seconds. Emma's blood ran cold. What do you want? I want you to understand something very important. The senator you saved? She wasn't the real target tonight. You were. Everything that's happened, the setup, the accusations, the attack, it was all designed to flush you out of hiding, to see if you remembered too much from Kandahar, to find out if you were still a threat. A threat to who? To people who've spent years building something very profitable and very illegal. People who don't appreciate loose ends walking around with classified knowledge. Emma's mind was racing. The chemical weapon program. It's still active. You're still developing it. We're improving it, making it better, untraceable, and very, very expensive for the right buyers. You're selling chemical weapons to terrorists. A laugh, cold, devoid of humanity. We're selling solutions to complex geopolitical problems. The market doesn't care about morality, only effectiveness. I'll expose you, Emma said, her voice shaking with rage. I'll go to the media, the FBI, anyone who'll listen. With what evidence? You're a disgraced nurse who's been caught on security cameras running from federal agents. You have no credibility, no proof, no allies. Right now, you're just a crazy woman with a conspiracy theory. Emma's hand tightened on the phone. The colonel is very concerned about national security and very interested in keeping certain programs classified, even from himself. The voice paused. You have one chance to survive this, Lieutenant. Walk away. Leave Phoenix tonight. Disappear. We'll call off the hunt. You get to live your quiet little life somewhere else. Everyone wins. Except Senator Vance, and everyone else you're planning to test your weapons on. Acceptable losses. The world's a dangerous place. People die. It's unfortunate but inevitable. Emma felt something crystallize inside her. A decision forming that she knew she couldn't take back. No, she said quietly. Excuse me? I said no. I'm not running. I'm not hiding. And I'm not letting you kill people with weapons I helped identify 3 years ago. You want me dead? Come and get me. But I'm taking you down first. Silence on the other end of the line. Then, unfortunate choice, Lieutenant, truly. You were one of the good ones. It's a shame you're going to die tonight. The call ended. Emma stood in the darkness of the parking structure, her heart pounding, every muscle tensed for fight or flight. Around her, car engine started. She spun and saw vehicles pulling out of parking spaces, 6 of them, forming a loose circle around her position. They'd been waiting, watching, probably tracking her phone signal. The car windows were tinted, but Emma could see shapes inside. Armed, professional, moving with coordinated precision. She was surrounded, outgunned, alone, and absolutely furious. Emma Cross had spent 6 years trying to be normal, trying to forget she'd ever been a soldier, trying to convince herself that she could leave the war behind. But the war had found her anyway. The car doors started to open. Emma grabbed a tire iron from a nearby maintenance cart and settled into a combat stance. Her hands weren't shaking anymore. Her breathing was steady. The cold calm that used to come before firefights had settled over her like armor. They wanted her dead? They were going to have to earn it. The first man stepped out of his vehicle, raising a weapon. And then the entire parking structure exploded with the sound of approaching helicopters and the screech of military vehicles pouring in from every entrance. The cavalry had arrived. But as Emma watched the heavily armed soldiers fan out around her, creating a protective perimeter between her and the assassins, she realized something that made her blood run even colder than before. She recognized one of the faces in those dark cars. Recognized him because she'd seen him less than an hour ago, standing in the trauma bay. Watching. Taking notes. He was wearing a federal agent's badge, which meant the conspiracy reached all the way to the people who were supposed to be protecting her. The federal agent's eyes met Emma's across the parking structure for exactly 3 seconds before he dove back into his vehicle and the engine roared to life. Tires screamed against concrete as all 6 cars peeled away in different directions, scattering like roaches when the lights came on. The military vehicles didn't pursue. They held their perimeter around Emma, weapons trained outward, creating a bubble of protection that felt less like rescue and more like containment. The colonel emerged from the lead vehicle, moving fast. His face was harder than before, carved from stone in old anger. "Lieutenant Cross, we need to move you. Now." Emma's grip tightened on the tire iron she was still holding. One of those men was wearing a federal badge. I saw him in the trauma bay earlier. I know. The colonel's voice was clipped, efficient. Which is why we're extracting you before more of them show up. Move. They surrounded her and hustled her toward an armored transport. Emma's training told her to comply, to trust the chain of command, to let the professionals handle the situation. But 6 years of civilian life had taught her that sometimes the professionals were the problem. "Where are we going?" she asked as they shoved her into the vehicle. "Somewhere secure." The colonel climbed in after her and banged twice on the partition. The transport lurched forward. "Somewhere we can figure out who we can trust." The vehicle tore out of the parking structure and into Phoenix traffic. Through the small, reinforced window, Emma watched the city blur past, ordinary people living ordinary lives while she sat in an armored box running from people who wanted her dead. "The phone call," she said. "Someone called me right before those cars showed up. They knew where I was. They offered me a deal, disappear and live, or fight and die." The colonel's expression darkened. "What did you tell them?" "What do you think I told them?" Something that might have been respect flickered across his face. "That's going to make the next few hours complicated." "It's already complicated. A federal agent just tried to kill me. How high does this thing go?" "Higher than either of us wants to think about." The colonel pulled out a tablet and started typing rapidly. "Senator Vance isn't the first person to get hit. She was right about the soldier at Walter Reed. Staff Sergeant Michael Torres died 3 weeks ago during what was officially classified as a training accident. but I pulled his autopsy report. He turned the tablet to show Emma. Look familiar? Emma studied the medical documentation. The symptoms were identical to what she'd treated in Senator Vance: the pinpoint pupils, the excessive salivation, the respiratory distress. Same neurotoxin, or a version of it. Torres was a logistics specialist. No reason he should have been anywhere near chemical weapons. But 2 days before he died, he filed a report with the Inspector General's office claiming he'd discovered irregularities in supply shipments going through his base. What kind of irregularities? Medical equipment and pharmaceuticals being shipped to addresses that don't exist, manifests that didn't match actual cargo, money moving through accounts that weren't properly authorized. The colonel's jaw tightened. He thought it was smuggling, drug trafficking maybe. He had no idea he'd stumbled onto something much worse. Emma felt her stomach turn. They killed him to keep him quiet. And then they tried to kill Senator Vance when she started asking questions about his death. She's on the Armed Services Committee. She has oversight authority. She could have blown this whole thing wide open. The colonel closed the tablet. Which brings us to you. I'm not on any committee. I'm just a nurse. You're a combat medic with classified knowledge of chemical weapons programs. You were in Kandahar when that hybrid nerve agent showed up. You wrote a report identifying it as a new formula that nobody had seen before. A formula that someone was clearly field testing on enemy combatants. Emma's blood went cold as the implications sank in. You're saying the attack in Kandahar wasn't the enemy testing a weapon. It was our own people. I'm saying we need to consider that possibility. And if it's true, then everyone who knows about it becomes a liability. The colonel leaned forward. How many people read your report, Lieutenant? It was classified above my pay grade. I submitted it and never heard anything back. I assumed it went to DARPA or CIA or whoever handles that kind of thing. It went to a classified research division called Project Clearwater, Department of Defense Black Budget Program. Off the books, no congressional oversight, and officially, it was shut down 2 years ago after an audit raised concerns about ethical violations. But it wasn't actually shut down. No, it just went deeper underground. New names, new funding channels, same research. The transport took a hard turn and Emma grabbed the handrail. Someone inside that program has been using military supply chains to manufacture and distribute chemical weapons, selling them to the highest bidder, and anyone who gets close to discovering the truth ends up dead. Emma's mind was racing through the timeline. Kandahar 3 years ago. Project Clearwater supposedly shut down 2 years ago. Staff Sergeant Torres dead 3 weeks ago. Senator Vance attacked tonight. And her own setup at the hospital timed perfectly to coincide with the senator's arrival. They knew she was coming to Mercy Ridge, Emma said slowly. They knew I worked there. They tried to get me fired or arrested so I wouldn't be available to treat her. Because if she died and I was the only person who could have saved her, then they could blame her death on your negligence. The disgraced nurse who let a senator die because she was too busy covering up her own mistakes. The colonel nodded grimly. It's actually a fairly elegant plan. 2 problems solved at once. The senator dies, you go to prison, and nobody ever connects it to a classified weapons program. Except I saved her, which is why they're trying to kill you now. You're not just a witness anymore. You're proof that the attack was survivable if treated correctly. Proof that someone with the right knowledge could identify the toxin and trace it back to its source. The transport slowed and Emma heard the unmistakable sound of heavy gates opening. They were entering some kind of secured facility. Through the window, she caught glimpses of high fences topped with razor wire, guard towers, military vehicles parked in neat rows. Where are we? She asked. Davis-Monthan Air Force Base, East Side Compound. The transport stopped and the colonel opened the door. Welcome to the most secure location in Arizona that isn't inside a mountain. They hustled Emma across an empty tarmac toward a nondescript building that looked like it had been designed by someone whose only architectural instruction was make it boring. Inside was all fluorescent lighting and government-issue furniture, and that particular smell of recycled air that every military facility in the world seemed to share. The colonel led her down a corridor and into a conference room. A woman in civilian clothes was waiting inside, standing by a wall covered in photographs and documents connected by red string like something out of a detective show. She was maybe 40, dark hair pulled back in a tight bun, eyes that missed nothing. Lieutenant Cross, she said without preamble, I'm Special Agent Rachel Mora, Defense Criminal Investigative Service. I've been investigating Project Clearwater for 8 months. You just became my star witness." Emma glanced between Maura and the colonel. "I didn't witness anything except people trying to kill me." "You witnessed the effects of a classified chemical weapon being used on American soil against a federal official. You treated the victim successfully, which means you can testify to the nature and origin of the toxin. That testimony is enough to open a formal criminal investigation." Maura moved to the wall of documents. "But I need more than testimony. I need proof. Evidence that will hold up in court and can't be buried under national security classifications. Good luck finding it. These people have access to classified databases. They can manipulate records, erase files, not hospital records," Maura interrupted, "not civilian medical documentation. You treated Senator Vance at Mercy Ridge Hospital, which means there's a complete record of her symptoms, your treatment protocol, and the toxin's effects. Records that are protected by HIPAA and medical privacy laws. Records that can't just disappear without triggering audits and investigations." Emma felt a spark of hope. "The blood samples. We took multiple blood draws for toxicology. Those samples are still at the hospital lab." "Exactly. And once we have physical evidence of the toxin, we can trace its chemical signature back to the facility that manufactured it." Maura pulled up a digital file on a laptop. Project Clearwater had 3 primary research sites. 2 of them are accounted for, legitimately shut down and decontaminated. But the 3rd site went dark 2 years ago. Equipment inventory shows everything was transferred to other facilities, but there's no record of where it actually went. The colonel crossed his arms. "You think they kept one site operational? I think they moved it, took the most sensitive equipment and relocated to somewhere off the grid, somewhere they could continue the research without oversight." Maura turned to Emma. "Your report from Kandahar described a hybrid nerve agent that combined VX compounds with synthetic components. You noted that the formula showed signs of recent development, inconsistencies in molecular structure that suggested ongoing refinement." Emma nodded slowly, like they were still perfecting it, still running trials. "On human subjects, in active combat zones where deaths could be attributed to enemy action." Maura's voice was flat, clinical, but Emma could hear the rage underneath. "They've been using war zones as testing grounds. Kandahar was just one site. We've found similar incidents in Syria, Yemen, Mali, anywhere with enough chaos to hide experimental weapons testing." "How many people have they killed?" "We don't know. Dozens at minimum. Maybe hundreds." Maura closed the laptop. "Which is why we need to move fast. Every hour they have to cover their tracks is another hour of evidence being destroyed and witnesses being eliminated. We need those blood samples from Mercy Ridge. We need Senator Vance's full medical records. And we need them before someone decides those records are too dangerous to exist." Emma's phone buzzed in her pocket. She'd forgotten she still had it. The screen showed another unknown number. "Don't answer that," the colonel said sharply. But Emma was already swiping to accept. She hit speaker so everyone could hear. "Lieutenant Cross," the same distorted voice from before. "I see you've made new friends. Agent Maura, Colonel Harding. How cozy!" Maura's face went pale. The colonel's hand moved toward his sidearm. "You're bugged," Emma said, looking around the room. "Not bugged, just well-informed." The voice carried an edge of amusement now. "Did you really think a military base would be safe? Do you have any idea how many people inside Davis-Monthan are on our payroll? You're not in a safe house, Lieutenant. You're in a box we built specifically for you." The lights went out. Emergency lighting kicked in a second later, bathing everything in red. An alarm started wailing somewhere deep in the building. "Move!" the colonel shouted, already heading for the door. Emma grabbed Maura's arm, and they ran. The corridor was chaos, soldiers running, officers shouting orders, the alarm drilling into everyone's skull. They burst through an exit and into the night air just as an explosion ripped through the building behind them. The blast wave threw Emma forward. She hit the ground hard, ears ringing, tasting blood. Maura landed beside her, already scrambling up and pulling Emma to her feet. "The senator?" Emma gasped. "We left her at the hospital. If they can attack a military base—" "She's already been moved," the colonel said, appearing out of the smoke with his weapon drawn. "Secure location, multiple guard details. She's safe." "Nobody's safe." Emma wiped blood from her lip. "You heard them. They have people everywhere, military, federal agencies, probably hospital administration too. How do we know who to trust?" A vehicle screeched to a halt beside them, a black SUV with civilian plates. The window rolled down and Emma tensed, ready to run. But the driver was a woman in hospital scrubs. Young, scared, but determined. "Lieutenant Cross, I'm Sarah Chen. No, I'm Sarah Reeves. I'm a nurse at Mercy Ridge. Dr. Donovan sent me. He said you'd need help." Emma stared at her. "Donovan? The same Donovan who tried to get me fired? He's terrified. Says he made a mistake. Says he'll testify about everything, but only if you can promise the federal government will protect him." Sarah glanced nervously at the burning building. "He gave me something. Said you'd understand what it means." She handed Emma a USB drive. Emma turned it over in her hands. It was labeled in Donovan's handwriting. "Medication logs, original plus altered versions, proof of tampering." "He kept copies," Emma breathed. "He documented the whole thing. He says there's more. Security footage from the administration wing. Financial records showing payments from a defense contractor called Meridian Solutions. Names of hospital board members who were involved." Sarah's hands gripped the steering wheel tight enough to make her knuckles white. "He wants immunity. Full witness protection. In exchange for everything he knows." Maura pulled out her phone and started making calls, walking away to speak rapidly to someone on the other end. The colonel studied Sarah with suspicious eyes. "How do we know this isn't another trap?" "You don't," Sarah said simply. "But Dr. Donovan figured out what he's dealing with, and he's smart enough to know he's next on their list. Rich doctors make easy targets. He wants to survive this. So do I. So do all the other nurses and staff who got caught up in whatever the hell is happening." Emma made a decision. "We go back to Mercy Ridge, get the blood samples, get the senator's complete medical records, get everything we can before they destroy it." "That's insane," the colonel said. "They'll be waiting for us. It's the most obvious move, which is why they won't expect us to actually do it," Emma interrupted. "They just attacked a military base. They probably think we're running for cover, going deeper underground, calling for backup. They won't expect us to walk right back into the hospital they've been using as their operational cover." Maura returned, pocketing her phone. "I've got teams mobilizing, but it'll take time, at least an hour before we have proper support in position." "We don't have an hour," Emma said. "Every minute we wait is another minute for them to sanitize records and disappear evidence. We go now. Small team, fast in and out before they realize what we're doing." "You're talking about 3 civilians walking into a hostile location with no backup and no tactical support," the colonel said. "That's not strategy. That's suicide." Emma looked at him steadily. "Then you'd better come with us, because I'm going either way." For a long moment, nobody moved. The building behind them continued to burn, throwing dancing shadows across the tarmac. Sirens wailed in the distance as fire crews responded. Then the colonel swore quietly and checked his weapon. "Fine, but we do this smart. Minimal exposure, grab what we need and get out. Anyone sees us, we abort immediately. Understood?" "Understood," Emma said. They piled into Sarah's SUV, Emma in the passenger seat, Maura and the colonel in the back. Sarah pulled away from the base, tires squealing, heading back towards Central Phoenix. "Tell me about Meridian Solutions," Emma said as they drove. Sarah kept her eyes on the road. "They're a defense contractor. Started about 5 years ago. Specialize in tactical pharmaceutical solutions according to their website. But Dr. Donovan says they're a front. Says the real work happens in private labs nobody knows about." "How did Donovan get involved with them?" "They approached him 2 years ago, offered research funding, said they wanted to partner with civilian hospitals to test new emergency medications. Seemed legitimate at first. But then the requests got weird. They wanted access to patient records. They wanted to know about specific cases, overdoses, chemical exposures, trauma injuries that involved unusual symptoms." Sarah's voice shook slightly. "Donovan figured out they were using the hospital as a testing ground, giving patients experimental drugs without consent, documenting the results. And anyone who died? Just another tragic case. Nobody questions death in an emergency room." Emma felt sick. "How many patients?" "I don't know. But Donovan has records, dates, names, everything he could document without getting caught." Sarah glanced at Emma. "He's not a good person. He did terrible things for money. But I think he finally realized he's in over his head." They drove in silence for a while. The city passed by outside the windows. Late-night traffic, neon signs, people in bars and restaurants who had no idea that chemical weapons were being manufactured and tested in their own backyard. Mora's phone buzzed. She answered, listened, then swore. That was my office. The explosion at Davis Monthan is being reported as an electrical fire. Accidental, no casualties. The base commander is already calling it a maintenance issue. Cover up, the colonel muttered. They've got brass involved too. Or the brass are scared of whoever's pulling the strings, Emma said. How far up does this go? Who has enough power to manipulate military records, federal investigations, hospital administration, and defense contractors? Nobody had an answer to that. Mercy Ridge Hospital appeared ahead, lit up like a monument. Sarah pulled into the parking structure, choosing a spot near the emergency department entrance. The building looked normal, peaceful, like nothing terrible had happened there just a few hours ago. We split up, the colonel said. Cross and I will get the blood samples from the lab. Mora and Reeves will hit medical records for the senator's files. 10 minutes maximum. If anything feels wrong, we bail. They moved through the parking structure in pairs, Emma's heart hammering against her ribs. She'd walked through these corridors hundreds of times over the past 6 months. Now every shadow felt like a threat. Every closed door could be hiding armed men. The emergency department was quieter now. Night shift running on minimal staff. Emma recognized a few nurses, but they were too busy with patients to notice her. She and the colonel slipped past the main desk and down a side hallway toward the lab. The door was locked, but Emma still had her master access keycard, the one she'd kept taped under her car's sun visor in case of emergencies. She swiped it and held her breath. Green light. The lock clicked open. Amateur hour security, the colonel muttered, following her inside. The lab was empty. Banks of machines hummed quietly in the darkness. Emma moved quickly to the specimen refrigerator and started searching through labeled vials. Senator Vance's blood samples would be marked with her initials and the time of collection. Here, Emma whispered, pulling out 3 vials. Drawn at 20-minute intervals during treatment. Should show the toxin concentration and how it responded to the atropine protocol. She grabbed an insulated specimen bag and packed the vials carefully. They were halfway to the door when footsteps echoed in the hallway outside. The colonel pulled Emma behind a lab bench and they crouched in the darkness. Through the window in the door, Emma could see a security guard walking past, radio crackling. Lab's clear, the guard said into his radio. Moving to records. They waited until the footsteps faded, then slipped out and headed back toward the emergency department. Emma's phone buzzed with a text from Mora. Got the files. Meeting at vehicle. They were almost to the parking structure entrance when Emma heard a voice that made her freeze. Well, well, look who came back. Dr. Marcus Donovan stepped out from behind a pillar. He looked terrible, hair disheveled, tie loose, eyes red-rimmed like he hadn't slept. But he was alone. I didn't think you'd actually come, Donovan said. He pulled out a flask and took a long drink. Thought you'd be smart enough to run. Where's the evidence? Emma asked. The files you gave to Sarah Reeves, the security footage, the financial records. Safe? Hidden. I'm not stupid enough to carry them around. Donovan laughed bitterly. I'm already a dead man. Might as well take them down with me. Then testify. Work with the investigators. They'll protect you. Like they protected Staff Sergeant Torres? Like they protected Senator Vance? Donovan shook his head. Nobody can protect anyone from these people. They're everywhere. They own everything. The only reason I'm still breathing is because they haven't decided I'm worth killing yet. So why help us? Donovan's expression crumbled. Because I'm tired. I'm tired of lying. I'm tired of watching people die from drugs I helped test. I'm tired of pretending I'm some kind of brilliant doctor when really I'm just a coward who sold out for money. He looked at Emma with something that might have been regret. You were right earlier. They approached me, offered me funding for my research, promised career advancement. All I had to do was look the other way when their people needed access to hospital resources. And you said yes. I said yes, and then they owned me. Every time I tried to back out, they'd remind me that I was complicit, that if anyone found out what was happening, I'd go to prison too. So I kept my mouth shut and collected my checks and told myself it wasn't my fault. Donovan took another drink. But Tyler Brennan, that kid overdosing, That was them testing a new formula, seeing how it worked on someone young and healthy. And when he didn't die fast enough, they decided to blame you. Get you out of the way before the senator showed up. Emma felt her hands curl into fists. You could have stopped it. You could have refused to accuse me. I could have. But I was scared, and selfish, and weak. Donovan straightened up, trying to pull together some shred of dignity. I can't undo what I did, but I can make sure they don't get away with it. The evidence is in a safe deposit box at First National Bank. Keys taped under my desk in my office. Everything's documented. Patient names, drug formulas, financial transactions, correspondence with Meridian Solutions. He handed Emma a folded piece of paper. Safe deposit box number. My authorization for you to access it, signed and dated, should hold up in court. Emma took the paper. Why give this to me? Why not go directly to the authorities? Because I don't know who to trust in the authorities. But you I trust. You're the one person in this whole mess who hasn't been bought or threatened or compromised. Donovan smiled sadly. Plus, you're a lot harder to kill than I am. You've got military training, survival skills. I've got a martini habit and high blood pressure. The colonel stepped forward. Dr. Donovan, we can arrange protection. Don't bother, I'm not leaving this hospital. Donovan pulled out a pill bottle and showed it to them. The label was blank. Meridian Solutions sent these yesterday. Said they were special vitamins to help me handle stress. But I had them analyzed. They're poison, slow-acting, designed to look like a heart attack in someone my age with my health history. Emma's stomach dropped. Don't! Too late. Took the first dose this morning before I realized what they were. Figure I've got maybe 48 hours before my heart gives out. Donovan's voice was eerily calm. So I'm going to spend my last 2 days making sure those bastards burn. I've already leaked some information to the press, sent anonymous tips to the FBI, left copies of documents with my lawyer, and now I'm giving you the master file, the whole story, everything they tried to hide. He turned and started walking back toward the hospital entrance. Donovan, Emma called after him. He paused but didn't turn around. Get them, Lieutenant. Make sure what happened to me and all those patients actually means something. Make sure justice isn't just a word we pretend to believe in. Then he was gone, disappearing into the hospital where he'd spent years enabling atrocities for money and prestige. Emma stood there holding the paper with the safe deposit box information, feeling like she'd just witnessed a confession and a suicide note combined into one terrible moment. We need to move, the colonel said quietly, before someone realizes we're here. They made it back to the SUV where Maura and Sarah were waiting with a thick folder of medical files. Everyone piled in and Sarah pulled out of the parking structure, heading for the interstate. Nobody spoke for several minutes. The weight of what they'd learned sat heavy in the vehicle like a passenger nobody wanted to acknowledge. Finally, Maura broke the silence. I've got Senator Vance's complete treatment records. Every medication administered, every vitals check, complete toxicology workup. This is solid evidence. And I've got her blood samples, Emma added. Should be enough to identify the specific toxin formula and trace its chemical signature. Donovan gave us everything else, the colonel said. Location of his evidence cache, authorization to access it. If even half of what he claims is in there, we can bring down the entire network. Maura was already on her phone, calling in teams to secure the bank before someone else got to Donovan's safe deposit box. Emma listened to her rattle off orders and coordinates, assembling a response that sounded official and organized and like maybe they were actually going to survive this. Sarah drove them to a different location this time, a nondescript office building in a commercial district. Maura's backup team was already there, agents in suits and tactical gear creating a secure perimeter. They spent the next several hours going through everything. The blood samples were sent to a military lab for analysis. Senator Vance's medical records were photographed and backed up to multiple secure servers. Teams were dispatched to retrieve Donovan's evidence from the bank. Emma found herself in another conference room, this one with better coffee and fewer red strings on the walls. She was exhausted. Every muscle ached. Her scrubs were stained with blood and dirt and the smell of explosives. But her mind wouldn't stop working, wouldn't stop analyzing, wouldn't stop seeing the bigger picture forming. Maura entered carrying a laptop. Lab preliminary results are back. The toxin in Senator Vance's blood is definitely a VX derivative. Modified formula. Matches the chemical signature from your Kandahar report almost exactly. Almost? Emma caught the qualifier. It's been refined, more stable, more potent, less detectable. Mora pulled up molecular diagrams that looked like alien script to anyone without advanced chemistry knowledge. Whoever's making this has access to serious resources. This isn't some basement lab operation. This is state-of-the-art pharmaceutical manufacturing. The colonel appeared in the doorway. Teams just secured Donovan's safe deposit box. You're going to want to see this. They followed him to another room where agents were carefully documenting stacks of files, USB drives, and what looked like lab notebooks. One agent was photographing pages of handwritten notes. Another was uploading digital files to secure servers. Donovan wasn't kidding, Morris said softly. He documented everything. Patient names, dates of unauthorized drug administration, symptoms, outcomes, deaths. She picked up one of the lab notebooks. This reads like a Nazi medical experiment journal. Systematic testing of chemical compounds on unwilling human subjects. Emma felt bile rising in her throat. She moved to one of the open files and started reading. The clinical detachment in the notes made it somehow worse, reducing human suffering to data points and statistics. Here, an agent called out. Financial records, wire transfers from Meridian Solutions to Dr. Donovan's personal account. Over $2 million in the past 18 months. And here's the connection, another agent said, pulling up a document on a laptop. Meridian Solutions is a subsidiary of Arcturus Defense Group, which has contracts with the Department of Defense for pharmaceutical research and development, including Project Clearwater. The pieces were falling into place. A classified military research program that was officially shut down but actually went private. Defense contractors continuing the work under corporate cover. Civilian hospitals being used as testing grounds. Anyone who discovered the truth being systematically eliminated. We need to know who's running Arcturus, Emma said. Who's making the decisions? Who ordered the attacks on Torres and Senator Vance and everyone else? Mora was already pulling up corporate records. CEO is listed as hell. Her face went pale. General David Brennan, retired, former head of military chemical and biological defense programs. Brennan? Emma repeated. Like Tyler Brennan, the kid who overdosed? His father, and the hospital board director. The colonel's voice was grim. That's why Donovan accused you. Orders from the top. Frame the nurse, protect the family, cover up the testing operation. Emma's mind flashed back to Tyler Brennan on that gurney, pale and sweating, supposedly overdosing on fentanyl. But what if it hadn't been fentanyl at all? What if they'd been testing another formula, using the director's own son as a human guinea pig? We need to talk to Tyler, Emma said suddenly. If he's still alive, he might know something, or he might have been exposed to something that can help us understand the full scope of what they're developing. Mora made a call, waited. Her expression darkened. Tyler Brennan was discharged from Mercy Ridge 6 hours ago, against medical advice. His father signed him out. He took his son, Emma said, probably to finish covering up the evidence, or to silence him if he knows too much. The colonel pulled out his phone and started coordinating with his military contacts, trying to track down General Brennan's location. Mora did the same with her federal resources. Sarah sat in a corner looking shell-shocked by the scale of what she'd stumbled into. Emma walked to the window and stared out at the Phoenix skyline. Dawn was starting to break, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Somewhere out there, a retired general was running a chemical weapons manufacturing operation and killing anyone who threatened to expose it. Somewhere out there, his son was either complicit or in danger. And somewhere out there, more innocent people were probably being exposed to experimental toxins for profit. Lieutenant Cross, Emma turned. One of the agents was holding a phone out to her. It's Dr. Donovan. He's asking for you specifically. Emma took the phone. Donovan? His voice sounded wrong, strained, weak. Emma, listen carefully. I don't have much time. I confronted Brennan, told him I gave you everything. He's activating the final contingency. What does that mean? The toxin, the VX derivative. They've been manufacturing it at a facility hidden inside an abandoned pharmaceutical plant on the east side, and they just released it into the ventilation system at Mercy Ridge Hospital. Donovan's breathing was labored. Everyone in this building, all the patients, all the staff. We're all contaminated. Symptoms will start showing in minutes. Deaths in less than an hour. Emma's blood turned to ice. How much? Enough to kill everyone. Hundreds of people. Donovan coughed wetly. I'm sorry. I should have stopped this years ago. Now it's too late for all of us. The line went dead. Emma stared at the phone in her hand, her mind refusing to process what she'd just heard. Then training kicked in and she was moving, shouting orders, grabbing Maura and the colonel. Mercy Ridge Hospital. Mass casualty event. Chemical attack. We need every hazmat team in the state mobilized now. Every ambulance. Every available medical facility prepared to receive contaminated patients. Move! The room exploded into action. Agents on phones. Vehicles being deployed. Emergency protocols activating across the city. But Emma knew the terrible math. Even with perfect response time, even with unlimited resources, even with everything going right, hundreds of people were about to die. Unless she could stop it. I need a helicopter, Emma said to the colonel, and a hazmat suit, and every dose of atropine and pralidoxime you can get your hands on. You can't go back there, he said. It's a death trap. Those are my colleagues, my patients, people I worked beside for 6 months. Emma's voice was steel. And I'm the only person in this city who knows how to treat VX exposure in mass casualty scenarios. So either get me that helicopter or get out of my way. The colonel looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded and started making calls. 20 minutes later, Emma was in the air, Phoenix spreading out below her in the growing daylight. The helicopter carried enough antidote supplies to treat maybe 50 people. Not nearly enough. But it was all they could get ready in time. Through the headset, she could hear emergency radio traffic. First responders arriving at Mercy Ridge. Reports of patients and staff showing symptoms. Panic, confusion, people dying. The hospital appeared ahead, looking deceptively peaceful in the morning light. But Emma could see the chaos around it. Ambulances, fire trucks, people stumbling out of exits, coughing and convulsing. The helicopter set down on the roof helipad. Emma jumped out, already suited up in full hazmat gear, carrying a pack full of antidotes and treatment supplies. She ran for the roof access door, her mind calculating treatment protocols, triage priorities, survival probabilities. But when she opened the door and started down the stairs, she found someone waiting for her in the stairwell. General David Brennan, wearing a gas mask, holding a weapon. "Lieutenant Cross," he said, his voice muffled but clear, "I was hoping you'd come. We have so much to discuss." Emma's hand moved to the antidote pack hanging at her side, but she froze when Brennan's finger tightened on the trigger. The stairwell was narrow. No cover. No escape route. Just two people separated by 15 feet of concrete and the absolute certainty that one of them was about to die. "General," Emma said, keeping her voice steady despite the adrenaline screaming through her system. "People are dying downstairs. I can help them." "I know they're dying." Brennan adjusted his grip on the weapon. "That's the entire point. Mercy Ridge Hospital just became the largest uncontrolled chemical weapons test site in American history, and you, Lieutenant, are going to help me document every second of it." "By letting them die?" "By providing real-world efficacy data that no laboratory could ever replicate." Brennan's voice carried the measured tone of someone discussing weather or traffic. "Do you have any idea how expensive human testing is? How complicated it is to collect clean data without interference? But here, an entire hospital full of civilians, different ages, different health conditions, different genetic profiles. The toxin exposure is perfectly uniform. The environmental controls are ideal. The casualties will provide us with more actionable data in the next 3 hours than we could collect in 3 years of controlled laboratory work." Emma felt something crystallize inside her, cold rage that cut through fear like a blade. "You're insane. I'm practical. I'm also right. Every significant medical advancement in history has required human sacrifice. Anesthesia, antibiotics, vaccines, all of them tested on unwilling subjects at some point. We're just doing what needs to be done to create the next generation of military advantage." Brennan moved slightly, repositioning his aim at Emma's center mass. "You already know this. You already wrote about it in your Kandahar report. You already knew that the hybrid formula we were developing could save American lives by allowing us to neutralize entire enemy populations without expensive ground operations. I wrote that to warn people, to stop the program. Instead, you made us better. Your analysis of the formula's deficiencies gave us exactly what we needed to improve it. You were the most valuable asset we had in that entire operation. Brennan's voice carried something that might have been regret. Which is why we've been trying to kill you for 3 years instead of just recruiting you like we did with Donovan. You have that annoying moral compass. Even when presented with military necessity, you still choose ethics over pragmatism. Below them, Emma could hear screaming. Multiple voices, the unmistakable sound of people in respiratory distress. Every second she wasted talking was another second someone downstairs wasn't getting treatment. "Let me pass," Emma said. "I'll leave. I'll disappear. You can have your test. I won't interfere. You'll go to the authorities, you'll provide testimony, you'll make sure everything we've built gets torn down." Brennan shook his head. "No. I'm afraid you're too much of a liability. But your death will be useful too. We'll blame it on the toxin exposure. One more casualty among hundreds, and you'll have the honor of dying while attempting to save your colleagues. Very noble, very heroic, perfect narrative for the press." He raised the weapon to a proper firing stance. Emma moved without thinking about it. 6 years of muscle memory overriding conscious decision. She pivoted left as the first shot came. The bullet punched through the wall behind her, concrete dust exploding in white clouds. She dove down the stairs, taking them 3 at a time, her hazmat suit ripping against the rough edges. More shots. Closer. One grazed her shoulder, burning cold for a fraction of a second before adrenaline numbed it. Another punched through the stair rail inches from her leg. She hit the landing and threw herself through the nearest door. A hospital hallway, 2nd floor. The air tasted wrong, chemical, acrid, toxic. Her hazmat suit sensors were screaming warnings that she couldn't hear over her own ragged breathing. People were everywhere. Patients stumbling out of rooms, some in gowns, some in wheelchairs, all of them showing symptoms. Pinpoint pupils, excessive salivation, the characteristic tremor that came with nerve agent exposure. Triage. She needed to think in triage terms. Who could be saved? Who was beyond help? How to allocate limited resources for maximum effect. A nurse spotted her and grabbed her arm. "Thank God. We don't know what's happening. The patients just started getting sick all at once. The ventilation system, something's wrong with the ventilation system." "Chemical attack," Emma said, already moving. "VX derivative. We need to get everyone to the emergency exits, fresh air only, no enclosed spaces. And I need you to gather every bottle of atropine in this hospital. Every single one. Put it in the emergency department." "How much?" "All of it. We're going to need it." The nurse ran. Emma turned to the gathered patients and staff. Some were conscious and mobile. Others were deteriorating rapidly. One elderly woman was already in full respiratory failure, her body convulsing as her nervous system shut down. Emma knelt beside her and checked for a pulse. Still there, but fading. Without immediate intervention, this woman would be dead in minutes. "Can you hear me?" Emma asked, knowing the answer but needing to try anyway. The woman's eyes focused momentarily. Recognition. Terror. Then nothing as the seizures took over. Emma made the triage decision in her head. This woman needed resources that weren't available. Resources that could save people who had more recovery potential. It was brutal calculus, but it was the only way to save the maximum number of lives. She moved on. A man in scrubs, another nurse, was helping a patient toward the stairs. "The stairwell's blocked. There's someone up there shooting. Side stairs, east wing. Go." Emma pointed and kept moving. More patients. More decisions. Some could walk. Some needed help. Some were already too far gone. The emergency stairwell filled with people trying to escape. Emma herded them faster, knowing that every second in the contaminated atmosphere was another second of toxin absorption. Their symptoms were still mild: increased salivation, dilated pupils, muscle twitching. The real effects would come once the toxin reached critical saturation in their systems. The ground floor was chaos incarnate. The emergency department had transformed into an improvised triage zone. Patients lay on the floor, on gurneys, anywhere there was space. Medical staff moved between them with the mechanical efficiency of people running on pure training and adrenaline. The colonel appeared at Emma's side, now also in a hazmat suit. Atropine's here. We've got supplies stacked in every corner. But it's not going to be enough. We're estimating 500 people exposed. We have enough antidote for maybe 100 full treatments at this point. Start with the ones showing severe respiratory distress, Emma said, already moving toward the medication cart. Get IVs going. Push atropine, 2 milligrams IV immediately, then 5 to 10 milligram additional doses every 5 minutes until pupils start to dilate and respiratory symptoms improve. Anyone showing behavioral changes or altered consciousness gets pralidoxime 600 milligrams IM in both thighs. You're talking about changing standard protocols? Standard protocols are designed for single-patient treatment, Emma cut him off. In mass casualty scenarios with limited antidotes, we prioritize based on survival probability. Treat the ones we can save. Comfort the ones we can't. That's the math. She moved to the nearest patient, a woman in her 50s, cyanotic and struggling for breath. Emma started an IV line with practiced efficiency, her hands moving on pure muscle memory. Push the atropine. Check the response. Wait for the pupils to dilate slightly, indicating the drug was taking effect. Better, the woman gasped, her breathing slightly less desperate. What's happening? You're going to be okay, Emma said, knowing it might be a lie but saying it anyway. Stay here, keep breathing, don't move. She moved to the next patient, and the next, and the next. Time became fragmented. Minutes collapsed into moments. The emergency department walls seemed to close in, the air getting heavier, the chaos somehow both intensifying and becoming background noise to the singular task of keeping people alive. A young resident approached Emma with a tablet showing vital signs. We're running out of atropine, less than 3 doses left for IV administration, and we have 200 people who need it. Then we start using intramuscular injection for less severe cases. Lower dosage, longer absorption time. It'll buy them more time. Emma's voice sounded hollow in her own ears. How many deaths so far? 43 confirmed. Another 20 who won't make it. Emma nodded without feeling anything. The emotional weight was too heavy. She filed it away in that compartment soldiers learned to use in order to keep functioning under unbearable stress. What about General Brennan? She asked the colonel, who was still coordinating with his teams. Lost him. He left the hospital through the roof access. Probably got extracted by his own people before we could lock down the exits. The colonel's expression was dark. But we've got federal agents en route to his known residences. He's not going to disappear that easy. Emma wasn't convinced of that. Someone who could coordinate a chemical attack on a civilian hospital and manufacture weapons-grade nerve agents wasn't going to be caught by standard law enforcement protocols. He probably had escape routes planned, safe houses positioned, resources hidden in places that would take months to find. But that wasn't her problem right now. Right now her problem was the 13-year-old boy lying on a gurney in front of her, his body racked with tremors, his oxygen saturation dropping despite the mask strapped to his face. Emma checked his pupils, already pinpointed despite the atropine they'd given him 20 minutes ago. His nervous system was being destroyed faster than they could counteract it. She adjusted his oxygen and added another medication to his IV drip, something to help with the seizures that were starting to pull at his limbs. Stay with me, she whispered, knowing he couldn't hear her over the ventilator. Come on, fight it. His body convulsed. Once, twice. Then the monitors flatlined. Emma didn't hesitate. She grabbed the crash cart and started compressions. 1, 2, 3. Counting out the compressions, adjusting depth and speed. Someone charged the defibrillator, the shock, the body arching off the gurney, then back down to compressions. Come on, Emma gasped between compressions. Come on, come on, come on. 5 minutes? 10 minutes. The theoretical point where brain death became irreversible, but where you kept trying anyway because the alternative was giving up on another human being. 15 minutes. The monitor was still showing a systole. The boy's skin was already cooling. Emma finally stepped back and looked at the resident monitoring the rhythm. Time of death? 6:47 a.m., the resident said quietly. Emma moved to the next patient without looking back. She couldn't afford to look back. Couldn't afford to process the loss. Couldn't afford to feel anything. The morning dragged on. The The hospital's backup generators kicked in once someone managed to shut down the contaminated ventilation system. The flow of new casualties slowed. The ones who weren't going to make it started showing signs of organ failure and multi-system collapse. By 9 in the morning, the death toll had stabilized at 78 confirmed, with another 15 expected to die within the next few hours. Over 300 had been treated with varying degrees of success. A few hundred more had mild exposure but would recover without intervention. Emma sat down on the floor in the emergency department hallway, her back against a wall, unable to move any further. Her hazmat suit was torn in multiple places. Her hands were shaking. Every muscle in her body felt like it had been worked past its design limits. A medic approached with water and a protein bar. Emma drank the water and threw the food away. Her stomach had nothing in it and couldn't accept anything. Mora appeared, still in full hazmat gear. General Brennan's been located. Emma's head snapped up. Where? Industrial district. Private pharmaceutical manufacturing facility registered under a shell corporation. Looks like Project Clearwater's main lab. Mora pulled out a tablet showing satellite imagery of a nondescript warehouse. Local police have the area under observation, but haven't made entry yet, waiting for tactical teams. He'll have destroyed everything by the time they breach, Emma said flatly. Burned the research. Wiped the computers. Left behind a clean crime scene with no physical evidence. Probably. But we've got enough documentation from Donovan's evidence and the chemical analysis from the toxin exposure to move forward with prosecution, even without the lab. Mora paused. Colonel wants to know if you're ready to move. We need you to make an official statement to the federal investigators. Emma looked around at the emergency department. The bodies still being processed, the survivors being transferred to other facilities, the staff moving through their grief with mechanical efficiency. Give me 10 minutes, Emma said. She went to the bathroom and pulled off the torn hazmat suit. The mirror showed her a stranger, face streaked with sweat and dust, eyes hollow, mouth drawn tight. She cleaned up as best she could with paper towels and soap, but nothing could fix what she saw looking back at her. The weight of 78 deaths sat on her shoulders, 78 people who'd been alive yesterday. 78 people who'd come to the hospital for treatment or work, and instead had gotten contaminated with a chemical weapon designed by a general who viewed their deaths as data points. She thought about the boy. 13 years old, his whole life ahead of him, and now his body was probably already being transferred to the medical examiner's office for autopsy. Emma put her hand on the sink to steady herself. The rage that had kept her moving for hours was fading, leaving behind exhaustion so profound it felt like drowning. But drowning could wait. She had statements to give, evidence to provide, a general to see put in prison. She left the bathroom and found the colonel waiting for her. There's something else, he said quietly. Something you need to know about Dr. Donovan. Emma's stomach dropped. What? He survived. Somehow, he survived the poison. The colonel's expression was complicated, relief mixed with something darker. But he's got maybe hours left. The toxin from the hospital release finished what the Meridian poison started. He's in ICU. Won't make it through the night, but he's asking for you. Emma followed the colonel up to the ICU. It was quieter up here, separated from the chaos below by layers of walls and protocols. Donovan lay in a bed surrounded by monitors that charted his failing systems with brutal clarity. His skin had taken on a grayish tint. His breathing was labored despite the oxygen, but his eyes opened when Emma entered the room. You did it, Donovan whispered. You saved people. I heard them saying you brought the death toll down from predictions of 500 to less than 100. How many people did you save, Lieutenant? Emma pulled a chair close to his bed and sat down. Does it matter? Yes, it matters. Donovan's Hodkin trembled as he reached for her. Because I was responsible for none of that. I did nothing, and you did everything. You gave us the evidence. You exposed the program. Only after I'd already done terrible things. Only after I'd already participated in experiments that killed people. Only when I was scared of dying. Donovan's eyes were wet. That doesn't redeem me. That doesn't make me a good person. Emma didn't argue because he was right. Why did you want to see me? Because you need to know something about General Brennan. Something he told me in the lab when he was explaining why the test at the hospital would be so valuable. Donovan's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. He didn't just do this for data. He did it for you. The words didn't make sense. What? He said eliminating you would send a message that people who try to expose classified military programs get erased, that the government protects its own. He was going to use the hospital attack as the cover for your assassination, make it look like you died trying to save people, turn you into a martyr to intimidate anyone else who might have information about Project Clearwater. Emma felt the rage reignite, burning away the exhaustion. He planned this entire attack just to kill me. Not just you, but you were the primary target. Everything else was secondary to removing you as a threat. Donovan coughed, his whole body shaking with the effort. He told me he's going to disappear. He's got money hidden, new identity. He was planning to leave tonight. The colonel was already on his phone calling out new orders. Get surveillance on every airport, every border crossing. General Brennan is now classified as a flight risk. I want every resource focused on locating his position before... An alarm cut him off. The monitors around Donovan's bed started sounding. His heart rate was spiking erratically, his blood pressure dropping. A code team appeared within seconds, pushing Emma and the colonel out of the way. They went through the standard resuscitation protocols: chest compressions, medications, shock, compressions again. But Emma could see it in their eyes. They weren't expecting this to work. Donovan's systems were already too damaged. After 5 minutes, they stopped and called it. Time of death was recorded with clinical precision. Dr. Marcus Donovan became another statistic in the rising death toll. Emma left the ICU and found herself in a hallway that suddenly felt very cold and very quiet. The colonel caught up with her, moving with the purposefulness of someone who'd made a decision. We've got a location on General Brennan, he said. He's at a private airfield about 40 miles outside Phoenix. A Gulfstream is prepped and ready for departure. We're mobilizing every asset we have to intercept him before takeoff. How long? 30 minutes minimum. Could be too late. Emma made her choice in the span of a heartbeat. Get me a car. And a weapon. That's not protocol. Nothing about this is protocol, Colonel. A general just tried to kill me and murdered 78 people. I'm not letting him disappear because of bureaucratic procedures. Emma's voice was flat and certain. Get me a car, or I'll walk. The colonel studied her for a moment, then nodded sharply. Go. I'll call ahead and make sure the airfield gets locked down. But Emma, be careful. Brennan's trained military. He's not going to come quietly. 30 minutes later, Emma was flying down the desert highway in a black SUV with her foot pushed against the accelerator. The airfield appeared ahead, a strip of tarmac surrounded by hangars and a few small buildings. There was already movement there. Ground vehicles. Personnel running around with purpose. The Gulfstream was already being towed toward the runway. Emma pulled the SUV straight through the gate, tires spinning on loose gravel, and accelerated toward the aircraft. Security personnel scattered. Someone shouted commands into a radio. She aimed for the nose wheel and hit it at 40 miles per hour. The SUV lurched as it made contact. The jet's nose lifted at an awkward angle. The wheels started to collapse. Sparks flew as metal screamed against metal. The aircraft wasn't going anywhere. Emma threw the SUV into park and jumped out, the weapon the colonel had given her already in her hand. Federal agents were converging on the aircraft from multiple directions, weapons drawn, shouting orders. The cabin door opened. General David Brennan stepped out, his hands raised, his face a mask of controlled fury. Behind him, Emma could see Tyler Brennan, the hospital director's son, also emerging with his hands up. Well, Brennan said, his voice carrying the tone of someone commenting on weather. Didn't expect you to get here quite so fast, Lieutenant. You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, chemical weapons development, and crimes against humanity, Emma said, keeping her weapon steady. Am I? Brennan actually smiled. You have no authority to arrest anyone. You're not a federal agent, you're not law enforcement, you're a nurse, a disgraced one at that. Federal agents surrounded him, weapons trained on his center mass. They started reading him his rights, while other agents moved in to cuff both him and his son. Brennan didn't resist. He didn't struggle. He just walked toward the waiting vehicles with the posture of someone who understood he'd lost, but wasn't particularly concerned about it. As he passed Emma, he leaned close enough that she could hear him over the chaos. You think you've won, he whispered. But you've won nothing. This program is bigger than me, bigger than Donovan, bigger than Mercy Ridge Hospital. There are people in power who need what we're developing, people who'll make sure this never goes to trial, never goes public. The investigation will be classified. The evidence will be sealed. And in 5 years, someone else will start the program again under a different name. We'll see about that, Emma said, but something in his expression made her stomach tighten. He smiled again, a cold expression devoid of humanity. No, you won't. He was shoved into a vehicle and taken away. The federal agents were already on their radios, coordinating with prosecutors and higher-level officials. Emma could see the machinery of the criminal justice system starting to move, treating this like any other case despite the extraordinary circumstances. She holstered her weapon and stood in the desert heat, watching the scene unfold with a growing sense of unease. Because Brennan was right about one thing. Cases involving classified military programs didn't work the way normal criminal prosecutions worked. They got absorbed into the classified system. Trials happened in secret courts. Evidence got sealed under national security grounds. And the people who actually made the decisions never faced accountability because they stayed in the shadows. Emma's phone buzzed, a message from Maura. She opened it and felt the unease transform into something colder. Urgent. High-level meeting happening at DOD. Multiple officials requesting full immunity agreements for cooperation regarding Project Clearwater. Looks like larger conspiracy involvement than just Brennan. Another message came through immediately after. Prosecutor just informed me that Attorney General is invoking classification authority. All evidence being transferred to federal custody. Investigation being taken over by classified task force. Our access revoked. Emma read the messages twice to make sure she understood what she was seeing. The case was being buried. Not officially, not publicly, but buried nonetheless, absorbed into the classified system where it could be controlled and shaped and ultimately made to disappear. General Brennan would face charges. He'd probably go to prison. But the program would continue. The research would go on. Someone else would take his place and the whole cycle would start again. She'd saved 78 people today, but she hadn't stopped anything, hadn't really changed anything. The machine was too big, the corruption too deep, the secrecy too well entrenched. Emma's phone rang. Unmarked number. She almost didn't answer, but she did. Lieutenant Cross? A new voice. Older. Someone used to giving orders that were always obeyed. This is Deputy Director James Halloway, Defense Intelligence Agency. I believe we need to have a conversation about your future. My future? Your case is being closed as of now. All charges against you are being expunged. Your military record is being restored with full honors and back pay. You're being offered a position with the Defense Intelligence Agency at the rank of Major, starting salary of $180,000 annually. Emma's blood went cold. You're trying to buy my silence. I'm offering you an opportunity to take part in solving the exact problem you've been fighting against. Working from inside, where you can actually make a difference. Halloway's voice was smooth, reasonable, seductive. Or you can walk away. Go back to being a civilian nurse. Let the classified system handle everything. Watch from the sidelines as people continue to die from weapons you helped identify and couldn't stop. Emma closed her eyes. She could already see how it would play out. If she refused, she'd be trapped in the civilian system, unable to access classified information, powerless to stop the program's evolution. If she accepted, she'd be inside the system where she could theoretically influence things from within. But she'd also be complicit, bound by secrecy classifications, unable to tell the truth to anyone who actually mattered. I need time to think about it, she said. You have 2 hours, Lieutenant. After that, the offer expires and the classified prosecutors will begin moving forward with charges against you for knowledge of classified information without proper authorization to possess it. Halloway paused. Welcome to the real world, where winning and losing are much more complicated than you thought. The call ended. Emma stood in the desert, surrounded by federal vehicles and armed agents, and understood the terrible truth that Brennan had tried to tell her. She'd won the battle. But the war had never actually been a real fight at all. It had been an illusion, a carefully constructed system where accountability was impossible because everyone involved already understood the game's real rules. And the worst part? The system didn't need her to disappear to neutralize the threat she represented. It just needed her to join it, to become part of the machine instead of standing against it, to compromise just enough that she'd be complicit enough to never be believed again if she tried to expose the truth. A black sedan pulled up next to her. The window rolled down. A man in a suit sat in the passenger seat. Major Cross, he said politely, The deputy director sent me to discuss your compensation package. Shall we begin? Emma stared at him, her mind racing through impossible choices, her stomach twisting with the realization that sometimes there was no way to win. Sometimes you just lost in different ways. She reached for the car door, and that's when the news alert came through on her phone. Breaking. Federal prosecutor Sarah Reeves found dead in her home. Apparent suicide. Investigation ongoing. Emma's hand froze on the door handle as the world seemed to tilt underneath her feet. Sarah Reeves wasn't federal. She was a nurse, the same nurse who'd helped her escape Mercy Ridge Hospital, the same nurse who'd risked everything to help expose the conspiracy. And now she was dead. Emma's phone started ringing again. Another unmarked number. Just so you understand the situation you're in, the voice on the phone said. Different person, same DIA bureaucracy. Everyone who helped you is going to start having accidents, car crashes, sudden illnesses, suicides. It's going to happen regardless of what you choose. The only variable is whether your cooperation might save some of them from needing to be silenced. The call ended. Emma stood in the desert heat, understanding finally that she'd never been fighting General Brennan or Project Clearwater or even the conspiracy itself. She'd been fighting an entire system designed to protect itself. And the system had just shown her exactly how far it was willing to go. Emma didn't get in the sedan. She walked away from it instead, her phone still buzzing with messages and missed calls. The man in the suit shouted after her, but she didn't look back. Her mind had gone through something that resembled calculation but felt more like shattering. Sarah Reeves was dead. A nurse. A person who'd risked her job and her safety to help expose a conspiracy. And they'd killed her to send a message. To prove that the system could reach anyone, anywhere, anytime. It was a threat wrapped in a murder wrapped in a warning. Emma reached the highway and flagged down the first car that passed, a civilian pickup truck driven by an older man heading toward Phoenix. She didn't explain anything, just gave him an address and $50 for gas. The address was the federal building downtown, the same place where Senator Vance's office was located, the same place where the federal investigators were supposedly coordinating the prosecution against Brennan. Emma knew they wouldn't prosecute him. Not really. Not in any meaningful way. He'd get a trial that would be mostly sealed. He'd get a sentence that the appeals process would eventually reduce. He'd end up in a minimum security facility where people like him went to wait out their time until connections and money bought them freedom. But there was one thing the system couldn't control. One thing that existed outside the classified infrastructure and the chain of command and the networks of corruption. The truth. Emma walked into the federal building and went directly to the media center on the ground floor. It was mid-morning now, and the building was full of people, federal employees, visitors, contractors flowing through the corridors like blood cells through an artery. She found an empty office on the second floor and called the local news station. Then the state news. Then the national networks. She identified herself as the nurse who'd treated Senator Vance. She told them she had documentation of a classified chemical weapons program. She told them people had been killed to keep it secret. By the time security arrived to escort her out of the building, the story was already spreading. The colonel found her in the lobby. His face was dark with anger. "What the hell did you just do?" he demanded, pulling her toward a private corner. "What you couldn't do," Emma said flatly. "I went public. All of it. The program, the testing, the murders, the cover-up. Donovan's evidence, the blood samples from Mercy Ridge, everything. You just violated about 50 different federal statutes regarding classified information. You've made yourself a criminal." "I was already a criminal the moment I chose not to cooperate with the conspiracy." Emma met his eyes. "You know how this works. If I'd stayed quiet, if I'd disappeared, if I'd taken the job with the DIA, Sarah Reeves would still be dead. Brennan would still walk free. The program would continue under new management." The colonel's expression cracked slightly. "They're already moving against you. Warrants being issued. You have maybe an hour before—" "Before what? Before they arrest me? Before they classify everything and make it go away?" Emma shook her head. "It doesn't matter anymore. The story's out. Too many journalists have it now. Too many people know. The system can bury me, but they can't bury the information." What happened next occurred with the choreography of something that had been set in motion weeks ago and was only now reaching its inevitable conclusion. The first news report went live at 11:47 a.m. Anchor sitting in a perfectly lit studio, reading from a teleprompter about a classified military program developing chemical weapons, about tests being conducted on American citizens, about murders being covered up. Within minutes, the story was exploding across every network. Former officials being contacted for comment, Pentagon spokespeople issuing denials, the Defense Department announcing an immediate investigation into allegations of impropriety. But the damage was already done. Emma watched it unfold from a holding cell in the federal building. They'd arrested her almost immediately after the news broke, charging her with espionage in violation of the Espionage Act. She'd expected that. What she hadn't expected was how fast the political machinery would move. By evening, Senator Patricia Vance had given a statement from her hospital bed. Still recovering from toxin exposure, her voice hoarse but clear, she confirmed that she'd been the target of an assassination attempt. She confirmed that the attack was connected to her investigation into Project Clearwater. She called for a full congressional investigation. By midnight, 3 other senators had joined her, demanding answers. The media had tracked down other alleged victims of the program. Families of soldiers who'd died under mysterious circumstances. Civilians who'd been hospitalized with unexplained symptoms consistent with nerve agent exposure. The story had become too big to contain. Emma's attorney, a federal public defender who'd been assigned to her case, came to see her in her cell. "They're panicking," he said without preamble. "The Department of Justice is getting pressure from Congress to move fast on your case. Some senators want you prosecuted to the maximum extent of the law. Others want immunity for you in exchange for testimony. What do you recommend?" "Honestly, I recommend you stay quiet and let them figure this out. Because right now, you're the symbol of someone who exposed a massive government conspiracy. Prosecuting you would look terrible. Giving you immunity would be admitting the government was wrong." The attorney smiled grimly. Either way, the political calculation has shifted. By the next morning, the first arrests had been made beyond Brennan. The hospital administrator who'd been involved in the cover-up was taken into federal custody. 3 Meridian Solutions executives were arrested at their homes. A Pentagon official was removed from his position and referred for criminal investigation. The dominoes were falling. Emma sat in her cell and watched it on a television they'd allowed her to keep. News coverage was non-stop. Talking heads arguing about national security versus transparency. Ethics lawyers debating what constituted a crime when the crime was authorized at the highest levels of government. And then came the revelation that broke the whole thing open. A journalist digging through financial records discovered that Deputy Director James Halloway, the man who'd offered Emma a job, had been receiving payments from accounts tied to Meridian Solutions, consulting fees, research grants, millions of dollars flowing from a defense contractor to a federal official. The corruption ran deeper than anyone had realized. Halloway wasn't just protecting the program, he was profiting from it. He'd been actively involved in decisions about which military and civilian facilities would be used for testing, which patients would be exposed to experimental toxins, which deaths would be covered up. Federal agents showed up at his home. He tried to run. There was a brief chase through the streets of Arlington, then a standoff at a hotel where he'd barricaded himself in a room with a weapon. Emma watched the live news coverage as federal tactical teams surrounded the building. Halloway's face filled the screen for a brief moment. A man in his 60s, well-dressed, the kind of person you'd expect to see in government offices making important decisions. Then a gunshot, a brief moment of confusion from the news anchors, then confirmation that Halloway had taken his own life rather than face arrest. One less person to face justice. But the exposure had destroyed the protective infrastructure that had allowed the program to operate in secret. 3 days later, Emma was released from her cell. The federal prosecutor overseeing the case called it a matter of national security and parliamentary cooperation. What he really meant was that prosecuting her would be worse politically than letting her go. She walked out of the federal building into Phoenix sunshine that felt different than it had before. Changed. Or maybe she was changed. The weight of everything had settled into something that resembled acceptance. The colonel was waiting for her at the exit. "They're offering you a full pardon," he said. "Erasing your record completely, restoring your military status, back pay for the years you were out of service, plus a civilian settlement." For what? For being right, for being the one person willing to break ranks and tell the truth. The colonel's expression was complicated. "It's not justice. It's politics. But it's the best you're going to get. Emma nodded slowly. What about the program? Officially terminated, all research destroyed, facilities decommissioned. Official story is that it was shut down years ago and there were just some rogue elements that went too far. The colonel paused. Unofficially, there's already talk of starting something similar under a new name, in a different department, with better security. Of course there is. But it'll take years to establish. And now there's oversight, congressional committees, media attention. It'll be harder to do in secret. Not impossible, just harder. Emma understood that the system would regenerate like it always did, but at least this time she'd proven that exposure was possible, that the truth could breach the walls of classification and secrecy, that individuals could matter. She left the federal building and walked through downtown Phoenix. The city looked the same as it had before. Same buildings, same people, same cafes and storefronts and ordinary life continuing around her, but something fundamental had changed. When she passed a newsstand, she saw the headline, "Classified Program Exposed. Military Official Dead. Demand for Accountability." The story had become part of the public discourse. People in coffee shops were discussing it. College students on street corners were debating the ethics of it. The classified system had been breached, and it could never fully seal the crack. Emma found herself at Mercy Ridge Hospital. She hadn't planned to go there. Her feet just carried her in that direction, and she found herself standing in the parking lot where armed vehicles had surrounded her just days ago. The hospital was still operating. They'd reopened the emergency department after decontamination and repairs. Life had returned to a version of normal. A nurse she recognized, someone she'd worked with during her 6 months there, saw her and stopped. "Emma?" The nurse's name was Marcus. He'd been there during the attack. "I heard they let you go. Are you coming back to work?" "I don't think so," Emma said quietly. "We could use you. After what happened, half the staff quit. No one wants to work somewhere that the government used for chemical weapons testing." Marcus shook his head. "We're putting in new protocols, better security, independent oversight. We're trying to make it different." Emma understood what he was offering. A chance to go back, to rebuild, to try to make something good out of the ruins. But she also understood something deeper. Some places were contaminated in ways that went beyond chemical residue. Some institutions could be cleaned but never truly purified. And working there would just be a daily reminder of what had happened, of the people who died, of the system that had allowed it. "I need to do something else," Emma said. She walked away from the hospital and found a quiet park nearby, sat on a bench and let the afternoon heat settle on her shoulders. Her phone had been returned to her along with her belongings. She powered it on and saw hundreds of messages, media requests, congressional committee invitations, offers from book publishers and documentary filmmakers wanting to tell her story. One message stood out. It was from Senator Vance's office. "Senator Vance would like to meet with you regarding her legislative proposal, Classified Oversight and Accountability Act. She believes your testimony would be crucial." Emma read it twice. A senator who'd been poisoned wanted to create legislation to prevent it from happening to someone else, wanted to build protective structures into the system itself. It wasn't a perfect solution. The system would find ways to work around any new rules. Corruption would evolve, but at least the effort would exist. At least someone with power was trying. She called the number and agreed to meet. What happened next moved faster than Emma expected. The Classified Oversight and Accountability Act, named in honor of the victims of Project Clearwater, was drafted with Emma's input. She testified before Congress about what she'd experienced. She provided documentation of the program's history. She became the human face of the need for reform. The act passed with surprising support from both sides of the aisle. Nobody wanted to be seen as defending secret chemical weapons programs. The political calculation was clear. General David Brennan's trial was the last domino to fall. Public trial. Open courtroom. Media access. He was convicted on multiple counts and sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. As he was being led from the courtroom, he looked directly at Emma and smiled, a smile that said he'd already made peace with his outcome, that prison didn't really matter, that the real power, the ability to continue the program under new management, had already been secured elsewhere. Emma understood that smile. It was the smile of someone who knew that the system would survive even if he didn't, that the machinery would continue grinding, That in 5 or 10 or 20 years, someone else would be making similar decisions in similar secret rooms. But at least now there would be witnesses. At least now there would be oversight. At least now the odds of exposure were slightly better than before. 6 months after Brennan's conviction, Emma stood in front of a classroom at the Defense Intelligence Agency. She'd accepted a position teaching medical professionals about the warning signs of unauthorized weapons testing, teaching them what to look for, encouraging them to report anomalies up the chain of command, working inside the system, trying to change it from within. It wasn't the noble purity she'd wanted. It was compromise, complicity in certain ways, but it was also the most effective place to work. She was explaining the symptoms of nerve agent exposure to a room of military doctors when someone in the back raised their hand. Major Cross, given that you worked within the classified system that allowed Project Clearwater to exist, how can you credibly teach us about preventing similar programs in the future? It was a fair question. Emma had asked it of herself many times. Because I learned that from the inside, she said. I learned exactly how corruption works when it's protected by classification and secrecy. I learned how good people make terrible choices when they're isolated from accountability. And I learned that the only way to prevent it is to never stop questioning, never stop pushing for transparency, never accept that some things are too secret to examine. She paused, looking at the faces in the room. I also learned that exposing the truth costs more than people think. People died. People's lives were destroyed. Good people made terrible choices. And in the end, the system survived anyway. But what changed was that we saw it. We documented it. We prevented it from continuing exactly as it was. The class continued. More questions. More discussions about ethics and military necessity and the line between security and secrecy. As she was packing up her materials afterward, a man in a suit appeared at her office door. Major Cross, I'm Special Counsel Richard Hartwell. I'm investigating anomalies in Department of Energy Weapons research facilities. Emma felt the familiar chill, the beginning of another story, another conspiracy waiting to be uncovered. What kind of anomalies? She asked. The kind that looked very similar to what happened with Project Clearwater, Hartwell said quietly. Unauthorized human testing, chemical exposure, cover-ups, and someone's protecting it from above. Emma looked at him carefully, studied his face for signs of deception or manipulation. In this world, you learned never to trust anyone completely. You learned that the system regenerated, that corruption was like a virus, kill one strain and it mutated into something new. How many people? She asked. We don't know yet. That's why we need someone who's been through this before, someone who knows how to identify the pattern. Emma closed her office door and sat back down at her desk. Tell me everything you know, she said. And don't leave anything out. Hartwell pulled up a chair and started talking. Documents, names, facilities. A pattern that was disturbingly similar to Project Clearwater, but with subtle variations. Different names, different funding structures, but the same underlying reality. As he talked, Emma listened with the kind of focused intensity that only came from understanding the stakes. More victims, more deaths, more corruption being protected by the system's inherent machinery. She thought she was done with this, thought that exposing Project Clearwater would satisfy the need for justice, and then she could move on with her life. But she understood now that there was no moving on. Not really. Once you'd seen how the system actually worked, once you understood the machinery of corruption and cover-ups, you couldn't unknow it. You couldn't go back to comfortable ignorance. You could only keep fighting, keep exposing, keep pushing against the darkness until something changed, or until the darkness consumed you entirely. All right, Emma said, pulling out a notebook. Let's start from the beginning. Hartwell opened his files, and they began the work of tracing another thread in the same web of secrecy and corruption. Another battle in a war that would probably never truly end. As the sun set outside her office window, Emma realized something fundamental had shifted in her understanding of justice and accountability. She'd spent months thinking the victory was exposing Project Clearwater, thinking that taking down Brennan and Halloway and the others meant winning. But victory wasn't an endpoint. It was a process. It was the continuous, exhausting work of maintaining pressure against systems designed to evade accountability. It was accepting that you would never completely win, that you would only make winning slightly harder for the next person who tried to exploit the darkness. Emma Cross had started this journey as a nurse trying to survive another brutal shift at a hospital. She'd become something else. Not a hero. She was too aware of her own compromises for that. But something like a sentinel. Someone willing to stand in the gap between power and transparency. Someone willing to face the cost of telling the truth. The real story, she understood now, wasn't about one program or one general or one conspiracy. It was about the endless struggle between systems that wanted to hide and people willing to bring light, and that struggle would continue long after she was gone, would continue as long as humans were capable of both corruption and conscience. Emma picked up her phone and made a call to Agent Mora. "We have another one," she said quietly, "similar to Clearwater, but in a different agency. I'm going to need your help." There was a pause on the other end. Then, "How many people?" "Unknown. That's what we have to find out." "I'm in," Mora said. "Send me what you have." Emma hung up and started organizing the documents Hartwell had brought. Files to review, names to investigate, patterns to trace. The war wasn't over. It had never really started. It would probably never end. But at least now, some people knew to fight it, and that made all the difference. 2 years later, Emma stood in front of a congressional hearing room wearing dress blues that didn't quite fit anymore. The uniform had been issued to her that morning along with the official restoration of her military rank and honors. Major Emma Cross. The insignia felt heavy on her shoulders, like she was carrying the weight of every decision she'd made and every person she'd failed to save. The hearing room was packed. Media, congressional staff, general public observers who'd fought for tickets to witness this testimony. The Department of Energy scandal, the one Hartwell had brought to her, had spiraled far beyond anyone's initial predictions. 43 unauthorized human subjects exposed to experimental radiation. 12 confirmed deaths. Decades of cover-ups spanning multiple administrations. And at the center of it all was Deputy Secretary of Energy Thomas Garrett, who'd authorized the testing and covered it up for 15 years. Emma had spent those 2 years building the case, interviewing victims and their families, tracking financial records, identifying the bureaucrats and scientists and officials who'd enabled it. She'd become a name that appeared in investigations into government corruption with the same frequency that scandal appeared. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd been suspended from her job at Mercy Ridge for alleged negligence. Now she was the person government agencies called when they needed someone to uncover institutional criminality. Senator Patricia Vance, fully recovered from her poisoning and now the chair of the Armed Services Committee, leaned forward in her chair. "Major Cross, in your investigation into the Department of Energy testing program, did you encounter the same patterns of cover-up and witness elimination that you observed with Project Clearwater?" "Yes, Senator," Emma said, her voice steady. "The mechanisms were similar. Different funding structures, different agencies involved, but the fundamental pattern was identical. Someone at a high level authorized the testing. Lower-level scientists and medical personnel carried it out. Anyone who tried to report concerns was either silenced or removed, and when that wasn't enough, more aggressive measures were taken. Such as, 2 whistleblowers died in what were officially classified as accidents. A third disappeared. A fourth was hospitalized with a sudden illness that looked suspiciously like intentional poisoning before we intervened and got her into protective custody. The room erupted. Reporters scribbling notes, congressional aides passing messages. The machinery of accountability grinding into motion. Deputy Secretary Garrett sat at the prosecution table, flanked by his attorneys. His face had gone pale when Emma started detailing the poisoning attempt. He understood now that immunity wasn't coming, that his career, his freedom, his entire life had just been dismantled in front of cameras and courtrooms and the American public. "Major Cross," another senator asked, "in your testimony you mentioned identifying a current official still involved in authorizing illegal testing. Can you elaborate?" Emma opened a file and provided the name. A Pentagon official still in position, still making decisions about research funding and ethical oversight, still protected by the same machinery that had protected everyone before him. The hearing room fell silent as the implications sank in. What Emma was saying, what she'd learned over the past 2 years, was that the corruption didn't end with one prosecution or one program shutdown. It was ongoing, persistent, regenerating under new names and new administrators. But what had also changed was the visibility, the exposure, the inability to operate completely in secret. We're arresting Deputy Secretary Garrett right now, the senator announced, turning to the federal marshal standing at the back of the room. Based on Major Cross's testimony and the documentation she's provided, we have sufficient probable cause for charges including conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and violation of human rights statutes. Garrett stood up. His attorneys tried to pull him back down, but he shook them off. He stared directly at Emma across the hearing room with an expression of pure hatred. "You ruined my life," he said, his voice cracking. "I spent 30 years serving this country, 30 years making hard decisions that kept us safe. And you destroyed me because you couldn't understand that sometimes the greater good requires sacrifice." Emma met his eyes without flinching. "Those people weren't sacrifices. They were your victims. And you poisoned others to keep them quiet." Federal marshals moved to take Garrett into custody. He didn't resist. He just kept staring at Emma as they led him away, his expression cycling through rage and despair and the kind of devastation that came from understanding you'd lost everything. The hearing continued for another 3 hours. More testimony, more documentation, more names and dates and evidence of systemic corruption. When it finally ended, Emma left the hearing room to a hallway full of reporters shouting questions. She pushed through them without comment, her mind already moving past this victory to the next investigation waiting on her desk. There was always another investigation, another conspiracy, another layer of corruption waiting to be uncovered. But as she was leaving the building, she saw something that made her stop. A woman standing near the exit, young, mid-20s, looking at Emma with an expression of desperate hope. "Major Cross?" the woman said hesitantly. "I'm Rebecca Winters. My father was one of the victims in the Department of Energy program. He died 8 years ago from the radiation exposure. We never knew why. The government said it was cancer, just bad luck." Emma understood where this was going. The woman had probably attended the hearing, had heard the testimony about unauthorized human experimentation, had finally understood what had really happened to her father. "I'm sorry," Emma said, the words feeling inadequate. "Don't be sorry." "Thank you." Rebecca's eyes were wet. "For 3 years I thought my father had just gotten sick. I thought it was random, but you found out the truth. You found out he was murdered by people he trusted. You made sure they faced consequences." She reached out and squeezed Emma's hand. Then she was gone, disappearing into the crowd of reporters and observers flowing through the building's corridors. Emma stood there for a moment, feeling the weight of what Rebecca had said. She'd spent so long focused on the machinery of exposure and accountability that she hadn't fully considered what it meant to the people who'd lost someone. The closure, the answer, the ability to move forward knowing why. She left the building and walked through downtown Phoenix. The city had changed in the 2 years since the Project Clearwater exposure. There was more scrutiny of government programs, more congressional oversight, more awareness of the possibility that authorities could be lying. It wasn't perfect. The system still protected itself in countless ways, but the walls were thinner now. The darkness was easier to penetrate. Emma's phone buzzed. A message from Agent Mora. "New tip. Department of Veterans Affairs. Unauthorized medication trials on PTSD patients. You want this one?" Emma stopped walking and stared at the message. Another program, another set of victims, another layer of corruption waiting to be exposed. She could say no. She could step back. She could try to have something resembling a normal life. She had the resources now, the reputation, the authority to retire if she wanted to. But she understood something fundamental about herself that hadn't changed since she was kneeling on the floor of Mercy Ridge Hospital's emergency department being accused of negligence she hadn't committed. She couldn't stop fighting, couldn't stop pushing against the darkness, couldn't accept that the system would continue hurting people just because exposure was difficult and dangerous. "I'm in," she texted back to Mora. "Send me the details." Emma found herself at a coffee shop near the Federal Building. She ordered black coffee and sat at a corner table, opening the file Mora had sent. Names, dates, facilities, the same pattern repeating itself, the same corruption regenerating under new management, different victims but the same machinery. A young man approached her table. Uniform, military. He looked like he'd seen things no person should see. "Are you Major Cross?" he asked hesitantly. "Yes. I heard your testimony today. About the Department of Energy program." He paused, gathering courage. I've been experiencing symptoms consistent with unauthorized radiation exposure. I don't know if I was part of your investigation or a different one, but I wanted you to know, whatever you're doing, keep doing it, because it matters. Because knowing the truth matters more than not knowing. He left before Emma could respond. She sat with her coffee going cold, understanding that this was how change actually happened. Not through grand gestures or heroic moments, but through the accumulated weight of exposure, through individuals deciding that truth was more important than comfort, through small acts of resistance piling up until systems had to acknowledge them. Emma pulled out her laptop and started reviewing the Department of Veterans Affairs file, cross-referencing names with death records, identifying patterns in the data, building the initial framework that would eventually become another investigation. She worked through the afternoon and into the evening. By the time she left the coffee shop, she had a preliminary outline of the scope, maybe 30 to 50 victims across multiple VA facilities, deaths that had been attributed to suicide or accidental overdose, medication trials that had gone undocumented, the same story repeating itself, the same need for exposure. 3 months later, Emma was back in front of Congress. New hearing room, new senators asking questions, but the same fundamental message, that the system was corrupt, that authorities couldn't be trusted without oversight, that exposure was the only mechanism that actually created change. This time, the investigation moved faster. The media was primed. The public was watching. The political will to prosecute was present from the beginning. 17 VA officials were arrested within a month. 32 victims were formally acknowledged and offered compensation. The entire Department of Veterans Affairs underwent a complete audit and restructuring. It still wasn't enough. It never was. But it was something. Progress measured in increments. Justice achieved in pieces. Emma was promoted to colonel, then assigned to a new position within the Department of Defense, overseeing research ethics and conducting spot audits on classified programs. The irony of working inside the system that had created the problems she was now exposed was not lost on her. But she understood that this was where the real work happened. Not from the outside protesting corruption, but from the inside slowly, methodically, changing the mechanisms that allowed corruption to flourish. A year after her promotion, Emma sat in her office reviewing another set of concerning financial records when her secretary announced a visitor. Dr. Adrian Vale walked in. The man who'd tried to destroy her career at Mercy Ridge Hospital. He looked diminished somehow, older, haunted. Dr. Vale, Emma said carefully, gesturing for him to sit. This is unexpected. I've been following your work, Vale said without preamble. The investigations, the testimony, everything you've exposed. He paused. I want to come forward, about what happened at Mercy Ridge, about my involvement. Emma leaned back in her chair, studying him. She'd assumed Vale had already turned state's evidence as part of his cooperation deal, but apparently there was more. What specifically? She asked. The setup. You were right that I was pressured into accusing you, but what I never told anyone, because I was too ashamed, is that I knew the truth before the toxin was released. I knew about the program. I knew patients were being tested on. I knew it was happening at our hospital, and I did nothing. Emma felt the weight of his confession, the terrible arithmetic of complicity and cowardice. Why are you telling me this now? Because I saw that young woman on the news, the one whose father died in the Department of Energy program. She talked about finally knowing the truth instead of living with mystery. And I realized that I've been living with mystery my whole life. Mystery about who I am, what I'm capable of. Vale's hands were shaking. I need to face what I did. I need to testify about everything, not to be redeemed. I don't deserve redemption, but because it's the right thing. Emma understood that this was part of the process too. Not everyone who participated in corruption stayed silent. Some found conscience. Some wanted to atone. The system contained the possibility of redemption for those willing to face their actions. Start from the beginning, Emma said, turning on the recording device on her desk. Tell me everything you know, Vale testified. His testimony added details and context to the larger Project Clearwater investigation. New leads emerged. New perpetrators were identified. New victims finally had answers. The machinery of exposure and accountability continued grinding forward. Emma spent the next 5 years working inside the system. Spot audits on classified programs. Congressional testimony about ethics violations. building institutional safeguards that made secrecy harder to maintain. She never stopped exposing corruption, never stopped pushing for transparency, never accepted that the system was too large to change, and she learned something crucial in that time. Change didn't come from grand gestures or individual heroism. It came from the accumulated pressure of people choosing transparency over secrecy. It came from institutional structures that made lying harder. It came from the simple act of refusing to accept comfortable corruption. On the day Emma retired from the military, she stood in her apartment looking at the medals and commendations lining her walls. Decorations for exposure and testimony. Recognition from an institution that had once tried to destroy her for telling the truth. She packed them into a box without ceremony. They felt like artifacts from someone else's life. Emma had offers from think tanks, from universities, from private security firms willing to pay enormous money for someone with her expertise in identifying corruption. She turned them all down. Instead, she opened a small consulting practice, a one-woman operation helping whistleblowers navigate the dangerous process of exposure, teaching medical professionals about ethical obligations that supersede chain of command, training investigators how to identify the patterns of systematic corruption. It wasn't glamorous work. It didn't make headlines the way congressional testimony did. But it was foundational work, work that made exposure possible for people without her platform or resources. 5 years into her consulting practice, Emma received a call from a young nurse, scared, shaking, saying she'd discovered something terrible at her hospital and didn't know who to trust. Emma listened to the story of medication irregularities and patient symptoms that didn't match diagnoses. She heard the fear in the woman's voice, the same fear Emma had felt years ago when she realized something was wrong at Mercy Ridge. "I can help you," Emma said, "but I need you to understand something. This path doesn't end quickly. It doesn't end cleanly. It's going to be difficult and dangerous, and you might lose things that matter to you. But if I don't report it, people will keep dying," the nurse said. "Yes. Then I'll do it. I just need to know I'm not alone." Emma closed her eyes and thought about everything that had happened. The exposure, the prosecution, the politicians and bureaucrats who'd faced consequences, the victims who'd finally gotten answers, and the countless others still waiting, still living in institutions where corruption was quietly happening, still trusting authorities who'd betrayed that trust. "You're not alone," Emma said. "I'll help you, every step of the way. And when it gets hard, and it will get hard, I'll be there reminding you why it matters." She spent the next 6 months working with the nurse through the process of exposure, documenting evidence, building a timeline, gathering witnesses, creating a foundation solid enough to withstand the institutional resistance that would come. And when the time came for the nurse to go public, Emma stood with her, provided testimony, validated her concerns, made it clear that exposure wasn't the act of a traitor, but the act of someone with courage. The investigation led to arrests. The hospital implemented new oversight structures. Victims got answers. And Emma moved on to the next case. And the next. Building a network of people committed to transparency. Teaching them how systems worked and how to leverage that knowledge to expose corruption. She never became famous the way she had been after Project Clearwater. Never got invited to speak at prestigious conferences or write op-eds for major publications. But in quiet corners of government institutions and hospitals and military bases, people knew who to call when they discovered something terrible. People knew that Emma Cross would listen, would believe them, would help them navigate the machinery of exposure even when it was terrifying. One afternoon, Emma was working in her small office when she received an unexpected call, a voice she recognized immediately, Colonel Harding, the man who'd rescued her from the parking structure at Davis-Monthan. "Major," he said. He still used her military rank even though she'd retired. "I wanted you to know. We've discovered evidence of another unauthorized program, neurological modification research at a classified facility, worse than anything that came before." Emma felt the familiar weight settle on her shoulders. Another program, another set of victims, another opportunity to expose corruption. "Tell me," she said. And as Harding began explaining, Emma realized something about herself that hadn't changed since that night in the parking lot when she'd been surrounded by armed vehicles and assassins. She was still fighting, still pushing against the darkness, still believing that exposure mattered, still understanding that this work would never be finished because corruption was as persistent as humans were capable of committing it. But she was no longer alone in that fight. There was a network now. whistleblowers, investigators, journalists, congressional staff, all of them committed to the proposition that truth should be more important than secrecy. Emma Cross had started her journey as a nurse trying to survive another shift. She'd ended it as a soldier for transparency. Not a hero, she was too aware of her own compromises for that, but something more important. Someone who refused to accept that corruption was inevitable. Someone who believed exposure was possible. Someone willing to stand in the gap between power and accountability, no matter the cost. As she listened to Harding's briefing and took notes on the next investigation, Emma made peace with something she'd been struggling against since the beginning. There would always be another corruption to expose, always another program to investigate, always another fight against systems designed to hide themselves. And she was okay with that now, because she understood that fighting was the only way to create space for change, that exposure was the only language the system understood. Emma Cross put down the phone and opened a new file. The work continued. It always would. And that, she'd finally learned, was exactly as it should be.